The House will please come to order. So members, we're at that order of business of taking potential amendments and adopting our permanent rules for the 66 Wyoming House of Representatives and joint rules as well. We have a privilege of the floor. Okay. So members, I want to walk you through where they are on your website because they are online. If you go to the legislative homepage, under the three bars at the bottom, there's session information. If you pull up session information, you'll get another page. On that, there's a rules and legislative procedures tab. If you hit that, the rules will come up and you will see our House rules. So session, then rules and procedures, and then you should have a list of the rules. You will note that we already adopted House Rule 1, Division 1 and Division 2, and we have a proposed rules 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 at this time, and I guess we're probably still waiting on a couple more. I was anticipating a couple more, but they're not up yet. He's not listening. So does everybody kind of know where we are? Does anybody have more they're bringing up? Yeah, that's what I thought. Thank you very much. So,
Mr. Speaker,
make sure they've been approved. Yes. Yes, Chairman Flitner, please.
would you mind just repeating that one more time? I'm sorry, I didn't have my.
Did I
computer
do it
booted up.
did I do it at the summer speed? I apologize.
No,
Summer speed. So back to our homepage. And then at the bottom of the page, you'll have calendars, committees, legislation, legislators. Go to the bottom of the legislation. Session information. You'll pull up a new page. It says 2021 general session. In the middle of that page, you'll be rules and legislative procedures as a tab. Hit that tab and your rules should drop down. So you'll note that the joint rules adopted, joint rule 1 and 2 are adopted. We have a proposed rule, Senate rule that they've done some things with, and they've actually worked their rules. So we know technically what they've done. And then you see the House rules, and there's 2 through 6 that will be available. And if members have a rule they want considered, let's get to it. I guess we're going to have 3 more rules coming on. So refresh your page as we get a little further. Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, would you be so willing as to move the temporary rules of the 66 to be considered as the permanent rules of the 66, subject to any amendments, please? My apologies, members. We didn't quite get the logistics of this, I don't think, sorted out.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was curious. I
Please.
would kick this off. Mr. Speaker, I move the temporary rules of the 66 House of Representatives to be the permanent rules of the 66 House of Representatives, subject to the amendments that we'll be debating here shortly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. I appreciate that. So we do have amendments. The first amendment for our consideration is Amendment number 2, Representative Gray. So Representative Gray has asked that we do House Rule 3, since they're both his rules. I'll give him that prerogative to pick which one he wants to go with first. So House Rule 3, Representative Gray.
you.
Proposed House Rule 3, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Appreciate that, that indulgence here. I move Rule 3 to the rules, to the amendment to the joint rules. So what this rule does is it adds management audit as a committee that can be referred bills during the session. Management audit is a really fascinating committee that I've been working on for the last 2 years, and I really have enjoyed it. And it's undergone a little bit of a rethink. The representative from House District 56 has been key in that, and House District 3 and the former speaker, the current speaker. I mean, and we're on the cusp of something brilliant, really good, at least I'd say, borderline brilliant, I think, in this coming interim. And I just think it's important for this committee to be able to hear bills that it sponsors during the session. In statute, it is a standing committee. It's a statutorily created standing committee. And usually the committee only sponsors a few pieces of legislation. We had one a year and a half ago that was out of an audit that was done 4 years ago. And there was a lot of time and money put into this audit. It's been readjusted a little bit, but there was about 4 members of the LSO staff that used to be on program audits, and they had recommended a statutory change. And we came back and we proposed that statutory change, and it was referred to a committee that didn't really have that expertise. And so it went down without much discussion. And that was an audit that took a year and a half of staff time. It took 3 years of committee work. I mean, it was disjointed, of course, I mean, at different times. And I think it is appropriate for that committee to hear bills during the session if the speaker so chooses. I only think there would be a few of these bills. It's like the Rules Committee. There were a few referred in the last biennium to the Rules Committee. I don't think we'd need to have a dedicated time for it. But at the discretion, ultimately it's up to the speaker. I think the speaker should have the ability to refer bills to the Management Audit Committee, statutorily created committee. It's a standing committee, statutorily created standing committee. And it's really the only standing committee, I think, on that list that isn't able to hear bills during the session. So that's what the rule does. The reason it says 5 or 6 members is because the way the statute's created, sometimes the House has 5, sometimes it has 6. This year, I think we have 5 for this biennium. Last biennium, we had 6 because it alternates depending on who's the chairman. So I move that rule and ask for that consideration. I vote thank you.
Thank you very much. So members, this is second or third reading debate rules. So presenter, and then one time any member, second time members that went the first time, and then close out with the bringer of the motion. So with that, and these are adopted by a majority vote, and in the end, we adopt our rules by a majority vote. From there on, if we ever want to amend our rules after they've been adopted as a permanent, it takes a 2/3 vote. So I just want to be clear, we're all on the same page. Majority Floor Leader Summers, for your first time.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. And yeah, I don't mind the debate of whether we need another standing committee. I like the idea of a technology standing committee, and I think that we're getting so much of that today, but I don't think it's this committee. This committee has a much different purpose about looking at specific agencies and kind of delving into an audit on an agency. And this really, to me, is not a standing committee that you would have during a session. And the bigger question on it, if you do expand, then you have to have more staff in place costs more money. And so you have to think about that. So do I mind the conversation, whether we should have one, a different one? Absolutely not. But I don't think it's management audit on and against the rule.
Thank you very much. Any other member for their first time? I have Representative Brown going to the back microphone, Chairman Harshman coming to the front, Vice Chairman Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a quick question, and actually this, as we're looking at this as a House rule, I know that management audit right now is a joint committee that meets. And so I'm just kind of curious if there was discussion on that, on having this as a Senate. I looked through the rules and I didn't see a mirror amendment over on the other side. So if I could just get a little bit of discussion as to what the purpose of this, having this as a standing committee only on one side would be.
Thank you very much. Representative Yin for your first time.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, thank you. So my question is, what's an example of a bill that you think that would need to come to the standing committee that couldn't go to a committee right now? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chairman Harshman, first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the thought here behind this, but I think it's going to cost more money. It's going to be more staff. And I think, some of these amendments to the rules are coming up talking about offsets. And I think if we're going to really restructure, I think we should talk about a technology committee. We should talk, and maybe we do restructure our standing committees. But I think that's a bigger discussion than adding one here in a rule deal. So we've got the committee, they do a function. I don't think it's to bring bills. And so with that, I'd urge your no vote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any other member for the first time? Vice Chairman Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Management Audit Committee really has done some incredible work over the past to really take over the interim with their colleagues on the Senate side to look at issues. I recall there was an ongoing discussion on the delivery of early childhood developmental disability, developmental delays issues and how we fund them to the developmental preschools. And there was this back and forth in the legislature on it's overfunded, it's underfunded, and what the policy is. We handed that off to the audit committee, and they done an incredible job, done a great job. But then I think they handed that back to the standing committee. And I think that's I like the audit committee as it stands. And I think that they have brought some bills and some legislation, but I don't think that I would encourage, at least I don't support having it be in a standing committee.
Thank you. Any other member for their first time? Member for their first time? Going once, going twice, gone. Member for their second time? Member for their second time before the sponsor, to the sponsor, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's jogging my memory on some of the arguments against this, because originally this was going to be in the virtual session and we did the rules committee on it during the virtual session. So a little bit on the staff issue, first of all. I mean, this would probably only happen once or twice a session. Just like a rules committee, you have one meeting a session. I think the previous biennium, there was one or two bills that got referred. So we can pull in one of our staff that's already existing into that meeting. If not, I mean, literally members can take the notes on the amendments in the meeting. There's no need for any staff increase on this. We're talking about one or two meetings a session at the most. In terms of the argument on responding to the point from the representative from District 9 on the wording of this, and I actually learned a lot drafting this, is that our committees are created in our own rules, not in the joint rule, which has actually created some interesting issues. And so, but that's the way it is. So to draft this, you would have to bring it as an individual house. And I think in a way that's the way it should be in a way. So it's up to us to decide if we're going to refer it to management audit on our side. They can make a decision on their own. I think that's a separate decision. If they say yes, that's great. If they say no, that's great. But what's on the table now is whether the House Management Audit Committee is going to be able to be referred bills. In statute currently, that's why we're listed on the standing committees. When you pull up standing committees, we are able to draft legislation in statute and we are listed as a standing committee. But we're one of the only standing committees other than rules and procedure that does not meet regularly. And the intent is not to meet regularly at all. It's just so that the speaker can refer bills at his discretion. An example of a bill that would come out of this committee. So there's a couple things happening. We're still trying to do audits, but we're also have oversight over a number of committees, a number of agencies that previously haven't really fallen in a committee. So for example, the Department of Audit reports to the Management Audit Committee now, which it used to not have. It used to kind of go to corporations, but it still goes there as well. But we've been getting really into the special district reporting statute and some of the inconsistencies there and in the way special districts report. And so one of the things we've talked about is bringing legislation to clarify that. And I think it's appropriate for that committee to possibly hear that bill. And also after we complete an audit, anything. I mean, we just went through this CHINS experience where we were going to do an audit on CHINS, and there was a problem with the data collection on that program. And so we were talking about whether we needed legislation to fix that issue. And it's something we're continuing to talk about. That's an example of one of the things we've talked about writing another bill about. And we have drafted bills even in this last biennium. So I think it is appropriate for bills that they already can draft, for that committee to be able to hear those bills at the speaker's discretion. Let me just run through my notes here, make sure I said everything back that I wanted to say, pushing back. All right, thank you very much. I think this is appropriate, and appreciate an aye vote. Thank you.
So thank you. Members, we're voting on proposed House Rule 3. Requires a majority of the members to adopt. All those in favor of the motion to adopt House Rule 3, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. No. House Rule 3 has failed. Representative, would you like to go back to House Rule 2? Please.
In the past, we had always had recorded votes on rules that have been brought. Is that that's my recollection.
I do. The chief clerk and I actually conferred on that. We do not believe that. If you'd like a recorded vote, we can do a recorded vote. That's your prerogative at any time. But this is just like adopting an amendment. We adopt amendments to bills on a voice vote. And if there's a discrepancy or someone wants to call division, we take a division, have a standing vote. And if somebody wants further, we can go to a roll call. So,
all right, I'll call a division. Thank you.
So all those in favor of the rule, please stand. How many? All those opposed? More than 15. All right, next rule, Representative Gray, would you like to do your number 2?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move House Rule number 2 and ask for favorable consideration. So what this rule does, when I first got here, one of the things that happened on the budget is that there would be a lot of amendments with pay-fors on there. In 2017, there's a lot of amendments with pay-fors. Whenever you asked for an increase, there was a corresponding decrease. And then all of a sudden that changed. It was actually from second to third reading in 2017. Second reading had all these pay-for amendments and they all failed. Because when you have a pay-for, when you have to think about when you want to keep the budget balanced and you have an increase you're proposing, and you have to think about that corresponding trade-off, that becomes difficult. So what happened on third reading in 2017 is all those pay-for amendments became just do the increase, and a lot of those passed. And so since then, I haven't seen many of these corresponding pay-for amendments. And I think for one, from a transparency perspective, when we do budget amendments, it should be clear when we're increasing the deficit. And that's the original way I drafted it. And that's still in there in B. And then the representative from House District 13 said, well, that's kind of bifurcated. Why don't we have it the other way too? And I said, sure, we'll draft it so that a decrease is on there as well. So that when the public goes through and reads our amendments, it is very clear which ones are increasing the deficit and which ones aren't. And I think that's a transparency rule. And so that's all this does is it puts if it's going to increase the deficit, if you don't have a corresponding decrease with the increase, it's going to say it on the bottom of the amendment. if you have a decrease without a corresponding increase, it'll say that on the bottom of the amendment. And that's one that's decreasing the deficit. But I think we need to always be thinking about the trade-offs in what we do. And I'm concerned that when we just have these increase amendments, and I think we are going to have a lot of them next week, I'm concerned that doesn't happen enough. And I think it's also some of these amendments are quite, they're not written to be, it's not purposeful, but it's not totally clear if they're increasing net expenditure or not, and which ones are decreasing net expenditure and which ones are increasing it. So I think it should be clear for the public. It should be clear for us. It should be clear for everybody which ones are doing that. So I encourage an aye vote on this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Majority Floor Leader Summers for your first time.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. On and against the rule change. We all vote, anytime there's a budget amendment that either increases or decreases an appropriation, we take a vote, a roll call vote on that budget amendment. And so the transparency is there every time we increase or decrease. And the amendments are written, most of the time it'll say increase general funds by this or decrease LISRA money by this or whatever. And I just don't think it's necessary. We're duly elected, I think, to provide amendments that do anything, and all of the transparency is in our vote, and it's recorded, and we are told that this amendment decreases appropriation or increases. So I don't see a reason for this.
Thank you very much.
On and against.
Thank you, Chairman Olson, first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and against the proposed rule, and the good majority floor leader said exactly what I wanted to say. And if you address this from two different perspectives, one, transparency in the public, and two, how we make policy. The transparency one, for those of you that are new members, the good majority floor leader nailed it. There's going to have a roll call vote every time there's an increase. So I think that's pretty clear when the budget's being increased. I want to speak to the policymaking process because I served on appropriations, and this isn't a rule, but what I can say is that in my time that I served on appropriations, pretty much what's described in this rule is the practice of most, if not all, members, with exceptions, of course, and we're all duly elected as pointed out. But I distinctly recall as members would want to make changes to the the chief executive's proposed budget, that this was a common practice. Why? Why is it a common practice? Because our budget has to be balanced. So it is a common practice on the Appropriations Committee that when you want to add something in somewhere, you find another place to pull something out. So that's already occurring. And, speaking at least from my viewpoint, if you're as a policymaker and you're duly elected to decide what you want, but, maybe that's good policymaking. And when you bring an amendment on this floor, it's maybe a little bit different than that common practice inside the Appropriations Committee, but maybe you should consider that. And you should have a decrease somewhere else if you're going to increase, or conversely the other way. And the last thing I want to say is that if you take that policy too far to heart, and I think this is really important, I don't know that creates a sound budget in the long term. Because what you're saying is anytime that I want to put something in, I got to take something out. So whatever the status quo is, let's keep it right there. And then you just adopt, that's basically taking base budgeting to the extreme. And now you're saying whatever that number is that we had before, we just want to keep our budget the same. And I don't think that that's necessarily good policy making. Budgets ebb and flow with times. Sometimes budgets are larger, sometimes budgets are smaller, and they respond to the economies of the time. It's not necessarily true that a small budget is always good, and it's not necessarily true that a big budget is always good for the economy either. You've got to have that flexibility. So just caution the members to take this policy maybe a little too far, but there's nothing that stops you as a duly elected member from engaging in this process every day. And if you think it's good, then do it. If you don't, then increase a budget when you feel like it's necessary. Decrease a budget when you feel like it's necessary. On and against the rule. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Vice Chairman Larson Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if I could maybe get a little clarification in what I read as a proposed rule from the sponsor. And then what I heard him say, and I may be wrong, what I heard him say is if you're going to increase the deficit, you can't, if you're going to increase the deficit, then you've got to have something, this rule would say, have a like-minded or an offset to that. And you use the term deficit, whereas the language of the bill says for every increase, you've got to pull a like amount or a decrease out there. And I think that's important because as we get into the budget session, particularly for you new members, there will be some money on the table. And so whatever we necessarily increase spending on without taking a cut doesn't mean that you're adding to the deficit. We probably we'll have some general fund dollars there because there will be good ideas out there on programs and some things that you want to do. And that doesn't necessarily equate to the point that you're going to be adding to the deficit. We also, as you get a few years under you, you're going to learn that we have some savings and some other money there. And depending on what you do with an expenditure in a bill doesn't necessarily equate that you're adding to a deficit problem. And so if you could just clear that up a little bit for me to say that if you're saying if whatever you add, I giveth, I taketh away someplace. And if that's the intent, I don't agree with that, but I just want to understand that that's what he's trying to do.
All right, thank you very much. Representative Walters for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to encourage a no vote on this amendment. We're all duly elected to represent our constituents. And really what this is a rule that's trying to be put in place to tell us how we can or can't represent our constituents. And
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
at the end of the
What's your
day,
point?
Point of order. I think this is now the second time. I think they're thinking about the rule change that's coming later. This is a disclosure amendment. It's not an amendment preventing someone from bringing an amendment. So it's about the disclosure on the bottom of an amendment. It
Thank
doesn't-
you. Your point is taken. Please proceed to the amendment.
thank you again. As I was saying, this is about the ability to fairly represent our constituents independently. As it's already been stated, the disclosure is there when we cast the vote at the end of the discussion. This is not necessary, and this is just a rule to try and accomplish a task that a few members feel is necessary, but this is already in place by default, and so I would encourage a no vote.
Okay, thank you very much. Any else for the first time? Representative Jennings, first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So as a new person, I just think back on when I saw those things coming in like that. And I just think it made it a little easier and a little more transparent in my own mind and thinking on and in favor of it.
Thank you. Any other member for their first time? Member for their first time? If you want to speak to this amendment for your first time, Representative Wharf.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to speak in favor of this amendment. I also happen to be new here, and I've spent a lot of time on the other side of the aisle looking at the budget. I can tell you all the years I've been here, anything we can do to make the budget easier to understand, not just for me when I was on that side, but me now that I'm on this side, is a good thing. And I find it surprising that this body is deliberating, making it easier for people to understand whether it's increasing or decreasing something in the budget. So I would urge your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Any member for the first, Chairman Eklund.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I would speak to the opposite side of that. I think it would make it more confusing. Each time we bring an amendment, we would be thinking about the increase or decrease that we're making. And I have concerns that we'll be calling Rules Committee meetings constantly if we switch from the way we do it. It's transparent enough. People know how we vote, increase or decrease. And I think we just stick with the way we've been doing it.
Thank you, Chairman. Any other member for their first time? Any other member for their first time? Oh, I'm sorry. Madam Minority Floor Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and against this amendment for several reasons. First, think about it. When we bring budget amendments, it's a good idea about an increase or a decrease to a particular agency. That idea needs to stand on its own. We have rules regarding kind of one issue per bill. This is honestly saying right now with the budget, you bring an amendment, you're going to have at least 2 issues. We don't do that here in Wyoming. So that's number one. Number two, I think what this would ultimately mean is that LSO needs to have templates. Which template are you going to use? The add and subtract, the subtract and add, or neither? And you have to pick your template. We don't want to do that. On and against.
Thank you. Any other member for the first time? Representative Burt for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Being one of the freshmen, I may need some clarification on this because my understanding of what this rule is supposed to be for is to identify whether or not we are going to increase spending or decrease spending and have to identify that. But then I've also heard other testimony that our transparency is on how we vote. So anybody can look at how I vote. That's my voting record. I get that. But I'm not understanding if the how I vote is really the purpose of what this rule is. So if we can clarify that, does this rule somehow change the way that somebody can see how I vote? Or is this rule make the process of whether or not we're adding money or removing money to a particular amendment? I guess I'm confused. If I could get an answer on that, I'd be appreciative. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member for their first time? First time, Chairman Zwanitzer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Quite honestly, it doesn't matter if the amendment passes or not. If it passes, every budget amendment I'll bring, I'll just say the money comes from the LSRA or the money goes back in the LSRA, and you would never see this language on any budget amendment anyway. So vote your conscience, but.
All right, any Representative Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First for a second.
Any other member for their first time on Rule 2, proposed Rule 2, Representative Schwartz, first time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I've been listening to this conversation. I on and against the amendment, but I'm thinking about it from my perspective as a member of the Appropriations Committee. And it's almost as though we're giving this huge advantage to the Appropriations Committee because we just submit a budget and don't have to itemize throughout the budget what the balancing increases and decreases are. And then we bring the budget bill to, how shall I describe the rest of the legislature, the lesser people, and they don't have the same privilege. I apologize. But I find it to be unequal, and I like to think that we are a body that likes equality, so on and against.
Thank you. I'm sure there was no ill intent in that. We are all duly elected equally. All right. Any other member for their first time on this? Any other member from the first time? Any member for their first time, for their second time, any member? Second time, any member before the sponsor? To the sponsor, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So in answer to the first point on the transparency from the roll call, the transparency from the roll call is great. And this doesn't touch that at all. This is a different issue, which is whether the amendment is clear, whether this is increasing net expenditure or decreasing net expenditure. And I think that's a reasonable disclosure on an amendment. That's all this does. So there's still going to be the roll call. It's just a disclosure. You know, the other thing too, and I think there was some confusion about what this amendment does. There's a later amendment that is going to restrict someone from bringing an amendment if it has a net increase. You have to have a pay for, which is a way of doing it. This is a little bit softer. This is a disclosure. And that's why I called that point of order, because you can still bring your amendment. It's not restricting your rights as a legislator at all. All this is a disclosure. And if that's restricting your rights as a legislator, then the deadline amendment we're coming up on is a restriction. I mean, anything could be a restriction. You can still bring the amendment. This is just saying that there's a net increase or decrease in expenditure. I want to respond to the point from the member from House District 54, because I think this is really important in the way we talk about budgets, because, and this is about the concept of the balanced budget. Money is fungible. So say we run a surplus in the general fund in theory. That money,
Some conversations that are out inside the bar that could be taken outside, please. Please continue,
thank
Representative
you,
Gray.
Mr. Speaker. So money's fungible. If we're running a surplus in the general fund, that tips into savings to backfill all of our other deficits, which are substantial. So if you're saving $1 in the general fund, no matter what, even if you're running a surplus, you're reducing the deficit. So this, usually appropriations leaves a little bit that they could tip in on their own, but they leave a little room. This year I was seeing in the budget how they're doing it. If that tipped into savings, it would backfill our deficits in other accounts because we have substantial obligations other than the general fund. So to say that an increase on its own is not an increase to the deficit, I don't think you can say that in any circumstance. Every increase on the general fund is an increase net to the deficit because we have deficits in other accounts and because the general fund tips. So I think that I want to respond to that because it's a very important point in the way we think about those amendments. I'd encourage an aye vote on this amendment. I don't understand why this is so controversial, but yeah, I encourage an aye vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, we are voting on proposed House Amendment HR 002 amendment to the House rules. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment has failed. Division being called. Those in favor, please rise. All those opposed? Less or more than 23? Amendment has failed. Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, would you be so kind as to come up here and I'll get started on this one. The next rule for our consideration is proposed House Rule 0004, Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that House Rule Amendment number 4 to the joint rules be moved, and I ask for your favorable consideration. This is the bill, this is the amendment that was just debated a moment ago, and so I'll try to save some time and address the issues that were brought up probably unintentionally about the previous rule amendment. So this is the rule that asks for an offset for each increase that we would put a decrease somewhere else in the budget. And this is what I would say is that this body has a responsibility to control the purse strings for this government. And the executive branch has worked very diligently to come up with a reasonable budget that deals with a very difficult thing that we're moving into, and that is an ebb in our budget. This rule does not keep us from being able to have a larger budget in the future. It does not keep us from increasing this budget. It just simply says that if you're going to have an increase, you need to have a decrease in a different place. There will be many things that our constituents have asked us to change because it affects them. And as individual representatives of your constituents, you will still have an ability and an opportunity to address those issues. We would just ask that you be fiscally responsible about it and find another place where you can keep the budget low. The good appropriations committee also worked diligently to come up with a budget that very closely matches that of the governor. They don't have to have an offset. It's true. They increase or decrease the budget and come up with a number. That number this year happens to be approximately $450 million lower than it has been. And that is the direction we need to be going in a time like this. Our revenues are down. Everybody knows this. This is not new news. This is difficult work. And that is what we're here for, is difficult work. And this particular rule just allows us to maintain that difficult work that was already done for us in appropriations and in the executive branch. It was mentioned that there was money on the table, that there will be opportunities elsewhere to backfill these particular appropriations if we increase the budget. As was said earlier by the good representative from the center of the state, anytime we increase this budget that the appropriations has come out with, we are going to be dipping into the LSRA, our savings account. That is not a balanced budget. We have called it a balanced budget today, even though we are taking out of the LSRA. But to balance the budget, you don't take out a savings. That savings account is appropriately there so that we can go through the ups and downs of the particular industries that support our government. They go up and down. We've all lived through that. And that's a great plan that our predecessors put together. But we have to be responsible about how we use that savings. And as I see it right now, we're headed for a cliff that is going to affect education funding in a few years. When that savings account gets to $500 million, we're not going to be able to backfill our education funding. That's a big deal. And it's incumbent upon us to make the tough decisions today to protect that education, what's happening in the classroom. If we're not willing to do it today, it will be worse in the future. And we, as elected officials, will be held responsible for that. So I ask that you favorably consider this amendment to give us some sideboards to appreciate and support the good work of the Appropriations Committee and the executive branch. I'll stand for questions.
Representative Yan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment, this rule amendment, what it would do is enshrine a ton of power into the Appropriations Committee. It's that simple. You would say that the maximum value that the state could appropriate is up to the Appropriations Committee, and no member on this floor would be able to change that maximum value. And, to speak back to the words from my good representative that sits next to me from Teton County, I think we want to make sure that we all do our duly elected responsibility, and we should be equal in that ability to change the budget as we see fit for our constituents and not enshrine all of that power into one small committee. So I would urge you to defeat this amendment unless you want the Appropriations Committee to have that power of deciding for the rest of us how much money we're allowed to spend. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Chairman Zwanser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I don't really agree with the previous speaker. I actually agree with the person almost entirely of who brought the amendment. I think he's pretty much totally right about the problems ahead of us. The issue I have with the amendment is just a construction. It deals with just general fund. And if you've been here a long time, right? If you just look at the budget bill, there are 12 different funds that we move money back and forth, right? We have special revenue, we have federal funds, we have tobacco settlement, right? And so all of these work in tandem with one another. If we can find federal funds to supplant some loss in general funds, when we can, we do that. Under this amendment, it wouldn't allow us to do that. You have to do general fund offsets for general fund appropriations. And it's just too tightly constructed the way we do our budgeting and moving funds around. So unfortunately, I'm going to encourage a no vote on it. Just for the flexibility of us trying to solve our problems this year, you need more flexibility than this amendment's going to allow, forcing general funds to general funds.
Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to respond to that point on two times ago about who has the power, who doesn't. I mean, this isn't about who has the power. This is about what is the right policy for this body. And I would say that we've been delivered a budget that has some reductions, but we should as a body decide that we're going to hold those reductions in aggregate. It doesn't mean that there's some reductions that we should reverse, but there are other areas that we should find to pay for those reductions, to reversing those reductions. That's all this is saying. And so, you know, I think that's a policy statement from the body that I think is very positive. And you know, and it doesn't mean, one thing I'm very concerned about, you know, when the governor presents his budget and has these reductions, oftentimes it becomes up or down. Are we going to hold this reduction or are we not? Rather than a conversation that's a little more nuanced, which is that, you know, there's another place in the budget that for whatever reason, he didn't really find. And usually it's at the agency level in administration. That's what doesn't get cut so much as some of the services. That's the debate, the tension. And so when it's all up or down on the reductions that are in place, whether to continue them or not, it's not the right conversation, rather than thinking about the budget as a whole and saying there's another area where we can hold a reduction that he didn't see for whatever reason. And in aggregate, we can come out with a balanced amendment. So I urge an aye vote. Thank you.
Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Whoa, I think you got to stop and take a look at what you're doing here. I speak against this because it kind of reminds me of that fairy tale Cinderella. You know, you're designing a slipper, right? It's called a budget slipper. And then you're trying to cram everything into that slipper. And why would we want to make it harder on ourselves, much less the folks that are going to come after us? I don't think you want to do that. I think one of the beautiful things about our process, being citizens coming down here, and most of us like me, not knowing what the heck's going on, they would be able to have the flexibility in our rules to be able to come and address the various situations that we don't know that we're going to face. Remember the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns? So I would urge caution. Did I mention I'm against this? Yes, I'm against this. I recommend you are too. Thank you.
Any other members for the first time? Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So ladies and gentlemen, I think this is it's a philosophical debate, but it's not a practical debate. I'll just give you one example. When we come back and the House Appropriations present the bill next week, there's going to be amendment from the floor, from the House of Appropriations, adding $50 million back into the budget. It's coming. It's just to let you guys know it's coming. And why is that? Well, because in some ways, we found that particularly on certain Department of Health agencies, the third round of cuts are too draconian. And it just so happens that we have more money than we thought we did. And so we'll still present a balanced budget, but we're going to bring that amendment. So this is basically saying that we would have to come in and cut another 50 million when we're adding back in 150 million. But we don't need to do that because the budget will be balanced and we have to pass out a balanced budget. We just have to. So, and each one of us ought to be able to come up and say, I want to pay for this particular program. And I don't know where the money's going to come from other than the general fund. And how do you match up tit for tat? If you're cutting 2 million here, but you only can figure out how to cut 1 million, then it's kind of hard to even get your amendment going. And so you're just making it confusing. But, and really, we like single topic, single issue. Yeah, this is going to cost something and this is not going to cost something. And then we find out what it's going to cost and we decide, can we afford to do this? And is it worthwhile to cut this or to cut, either way. But I just think that we're overcomplicating it. And also you're just tying our hands for the purpose of tying our hands because that's what you want. And I would just suggest that we'll do this debate on each bill as it comes up, each amendment. And at the end, we'll have a balanced budget because we have to. So on and against.
Speaker Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. So I want to give you a very concrete examples. And we have certain obligations in statute that every so many years we have to do a cost-based analysis of a different program. One of them happens to be for those folks who are are very unfortunate to have disabilities. And every 4 years, 5 years, or 4 or 5 years, I can't remember now, we have to reevaluate what the cost of providing services for those folks is. And these are folks that cannot care for themselves, take care of themselves, very vulnerable in a lot of different ways. And so I happen to be a part of that rebasing process a couple of years ago. And it's run by an executive branch, those folks that deal with health, and they asked for a couple of liaisons. I happened to be on the Labor Health Committee at that time, and I had a Senate colleague. We were both on there, and we went through that process, understanding what the cost of providing care to these folks are, because that's what we mandated ourselves. The legislature mandated that we do this, mandated that we understand what the cost was to providing these services. And then we have a choice whether we respond to that, what we learn. Well, that year we learned we were undervaluing, under reimbursing the folks providing these services in our communities, approximately $20 million across the entire state, across a couple thousand people that receive these services. And this is folks that may have 24-hour, two-person care in some cases on ventilators. These are folks that have maybe fewer needs, but they still have needs. And other citizens are providing those care. And we are as a compassionate system helping take care of them, sometimes for a long time, for their entire lives. Well, do we continue to say, no, we can't, we have to pull it from somewhere else to take care of these? That's what I see this as getting to, where it would lead us to. That year, some of the most conservative folks in this body brought the amendment to actually advance those dollars to those folks. And they didn't look for an offset. They took it out of money we had in the bank. Here's the difference between where we are and where the government that's in back east. We're not operating by borrowing money. We're operating because we have money. We're not printing money. We have reserves. Folks that came before us gave us those opportunities. They gave us in the early 70s with our mineral trust fund and the things we get out of there, gave us borrowing abilities against that. LSRA, Legislative Stabilization Reserve Account, came around in the late 2000s when there was a lot of revenue and some other things kind of coalesced. We have some capacities. Let's not tie our hands to not do the things that we really do care for. We really do care for. We can have the discussion about wants, needs, et cetera. But there are certain things, folks, that we do really, they grab our heartstrings. They grab us, and they're quite things that we really do care about. And I would say that, tying our hands for all of those things, be cautious about that, because you're going to be taking it away from someone else. The folks that want to cut the budget, and I have them in my community, cut this. I say, cut this. I said, do you get anything from that program? Well, no. I said, okay, then start with a program that you get something from. Cut that one first. And then it's a lot easier to make the case to cut someone else's program. So on and against the amendment, because give yourselves the flexibility to care about things that come along. That's what we do. We take care of things as they come along. And if we got to take from some here, if we got to give something here, we're going to be taking it away from someone else. And then someone else says yak is getting gored.
Oh my. Any other members for their first time? Any other members for the first time? Any members second time for the sponsor? Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Want to respond to a couple of these points. So there's nothing stopping the budget from being re-referred to appropriations in between readings. So if the body has decided, hey, there's an increase we absolutely need, and we got this rule, can be re-referred, appropriations meets in the break, we can gavel down, 15 minutes, they can pass the amendment, then it comes back. But it keeps discipline on the floor. And what it stops, I think the discussion the speaker just had, inadvertently maybe really helps the amendment, because it gets to my frustration with the conversation we're going to have next week is we're going to talk for probably 10 to 12 hours for 2 days about whether or not the program should exist at all. And these are very important programs and difficult conversations. rather than saying there's administration in state government, there's room there. And that never seems to be what gets delivered first in these governor's budget. And because of that, a consequence of that is that the whole conversation is about core services. And that strikes me as problematic, because what we never get to is the core administration of these agencies, because that's not what is bearing the brunt of these reductions. Some of it, yes, but not the brunt of it. And what I'm hoping is that we can reframe the discussion and say, hey, let's reduce the administration of government to pay for these needed services. But the way it's framed right now, the whole conversation next week is going to be either we reduce these services that are very needed or we don't. And so that's very concerning. And that's the idea of the amendment. And, this other thing about borrowing money, this point about borrowing money, other states borrow money. I mean, I'm sitting on a projection that shows that we're going to have 300 million in the legislation in LISRA in 2026. Now, I know some people are contending the assumptions in the projection, but it has been prepared by our staff. And so what does that mean? We go under 500 million in LISRA. That goes back to House Bill 206 from 2017, 236, excuse me, from 2017. We've got a big problem. So we need to be talking about this now and not, in my opinion, not acting like we're really flush. We've got a structural problem, and the answer is not revenue. The answer is to look at our spending. So I'd urge, and I vote on this to help us reframe the debate next week. Thank you.
Any other members for their second time before the sponsor? Let's seeing anyone. Representative Bear.
Well, I really appreciate the debate. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate the debate, and the good gentleman just took away some of my thunder. I was going to just address the fact that we have a shrinking savings account. If we think that we have a budget that we didn't need to make smaller than last year's budget, then why is our LSO telling us that this savings account's getting smaller? It doesn't make sense to me. I'm a simple man, but it seems to me that if savings is reduced, then you're spending more than you have. That's just plain math to me. The good speaker brought up a great point about some unbelievably heart-wrenching programs that we have that people have become dependent upon the state. And, our health department has made decisions, very, very difficult decisions, to cut those programs, to make them go away. I'm sure each of you have heard the kind of stories that I have about how bad it is that we're going to take that away. Well, I got to ask you, how are we going to explain to them that we funded some of the things that are in this budget that are pork? You can't tell me that there's not. And you can't tell me that the people who are losing these important funds that they need for their in-home care and disability, that they're not going to find out that we've got $10 million going to match football funds. I'm a big sports fan, but how do we explain that to these people? And I just ask that the body think about that. And this particular amendment gives you an opportunity to make those decisions next week, so that when you have to answer your constituents about why you cut a program like that and kept other things in the budget, you don't have to have that conversation. You can say, hey, I did the hard work that the Appropriations Committee would do. I found something else that was a proper offset for that. And with that, I'm on for the amendment.
Thank you, Representative. We're at that point. We are now voting on House Rule number 4. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed? Amendment has not been adopted. We're on to amendment number 5. Speaker Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. So, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, I move proposed amendment to House Rules number 5 and ask for your favorable consideration. Members, in our joint rules, we have a 5 o'clock deadline the day before for second and third reading budget amendments. Second and third reading budget amendments are due to the LSO proposals the day before. So next Tuesday, you'll have to have your second reading amendments to be considered on Wednesday. Next Thursday at 5 o'clock, you have to have them for third reading on Friday. Our current rule says that you have to approve them, just like we went through today. At noon was the approval deadline for your bills. Approve them, but it's only 30 minutes before the beginning of the convening of the day. What that does is it puts our LSO staff and our chief clerk and the processing folks that get us copies, paper copies from wherever, from the copy center, when you approve them, copy center upstairs to the chief clerk. That puts them sometimes in a very tight spot, particularly on second reading. Third reading can be a little different because you have a little more time in the day, comes afterwards. But actually, that's maybe not true because sometimes we do third reading on the budget first because it could be a 7-hour, 8-hour deal. So all this proposes to do is to back it up an hour and a half. So you approve if we're going to start at 9, just send the email to LSO staff and say approve it before 7. That's all we're talking about. Now, I know that seems like maybe that's a big jump for some folks. We've had the budget for over a month when we get there next week. We have had the budget for over a month. 2 years ago and previous to that, we would have had the budget on Friday sometime, and we would start committee of the whole on the following Monday. You literally had the weekend to go through the budget in its final form. So folks, we have had I believe we've had plenty of time to analyze the budget and look at the budget, prepare amendments, think about amendments. We still have, even if we adopted this rule today, you still have from today until next Tuesday, almost a week, 6 days to get your amendments in, and then subsequently 12 hours later, you can approve them. So I hope you would see that is ample time compared to what we've had in the past as far as studying the budget. And this is really just a courtesy to our staff, but also a courtesy to each other. Because we want to see the budget amendments before we start hearing the debate. We'd like to be able to have them available to us and just give them a quick read. And the folks that have been here before know that budget amendments would come out as we were doing the budget. In fact, we would stall the budget at times, waiting for a budget amendment to come out. And so I think this is one of courtesy to each other, that we back this up and just say 2 hours versus a half an hour. And quite honestly, a logistical improvement for our staff as well. So I just ask for your favorable consideration. Stand for any questions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Anybody for their first time? Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just have a couple questions on how this is going to work. I mean, so do we just have to send the email saying approve, or does it have to be acknowledged? Because I mean, if it's 9 a.m. when we come in, and sometimes we come in early on the budget days, that's 7 a.m. I'm not sure, are they here? Are they not? Yet do they have to come back and say approved? Chuck, I got your email, or, or is it just me sending the email saying approved? And hopefully when we get back to face-to-face contact, do I need to have that verbal contact in person, or is it just going to be an email permanently? Because if they're not here yet, or it's 7 a.m., am I not going to, is that person not going to be able to bring their amendment? So that's my first question. And my second question is, like we were talking earlier about bifurcation between the power of appropriations and not. I mean, appropriations, we've talked about standing at ease while we're in the reading. That's because there's a rule that appropriations at any point can bring an amendment while we're in the reading. Now, there are reasons to do that, but to me, that's one of the biggest bifurcations and powers in our entire rules. And I just want to keep in mind, because we're setting all these deadlines more and more, and partially it's been because of the COVID, but I start to lose track of some of these deadlines and what exactly they're doing or what they're not. I mean, and so I just think that I don't know. I just pose that point out there and that question. Thank you.
Anyone else for the first time? Representative Wilson. Chairwoman Wilson, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm on and in favor of the amendment. I don't have any questions in particular. I think this is wonderful. Those of you who've been here before, you know how it drives you crazy. A 1.5-page long amendment. Well, that's on a bill. Usually it's not that long on the budget, but to try to actually read the amendments ahead of time and look at them and figure out if I like them or I don't like them or what is this doing, I think this is a great idea. Thank you.
Any other members for the first time? Any members for the second time before the sponsor? Okay, Speaker Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. So I appreciate my good colleague from the center of the state and wanting to some clarification. I don't think it changes the way we've been doing it. I have approved budget amendments by email, and all I gotta do is click on the website now, and they'll show up, or they'll be in my box in old times. But now they're just going to show up. Just like earlier, I knew there were some amendments coming, and I queued one of our colleagues, and I said, "Hey, did you approve your amendments?" And he said, "Yeah, I did." And so the chief clerk says, "Where the heck are they?" And so, but that's what we're talking about. The other thing is, and this goes to the good chairman of Labor Health. I kind of want to read it before I start hearing about it. Think about the amendments. And a lot of our amendments can be quite complex, even though they may be simple on the words, but they do things that move things around. So I like to read it so I know what's in it, so I know how I can, at least best intelligibly, vote on it. So I mean, an hour and a half, that's what we're talking about, the difference. And I want to assure folks, on budget days, on budget week, we have a staff probably here nearly 20 hours a day. 20 hours a day. And our chief clerk is probably here for 16 or 18 hours on the readings of those days. They know those are long days, and they are here to serve the best interest of the body, and that is preparing amendments and getting to us in a timely manner so we can consider them on the floor and do the people's business. So I'm confident that we're not going to miss anybody at 6 o'clock. I'll guarantee you that our chief fiscal folks are already here taking care of things on our behalf. So I'd ask for your favorable consideration. Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem.
Okay. Members, we are voting on amendment number 6 to the House rules. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? That amendment is adopted. We're on to, excuse me, I misspoke. I turned the page. I got to do this again, folks. I apologize. We're voting on House Rule 5 to the House rules. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Now it really passes. Okay, thank you. I apologize. We now are on to amendment number 6. Representative Larson.
Thank you, Speaker Pro Tem. I move amendment number 6 to House rules. Just a little explanation, I guess, and then we'll start. In the past 2 years, we've used the rescind motion a couple times. And when we used it, I'm not sure if we used it correctly. We would have went to Masons to decide if that was the correct way to use it. And so I'm bringing this forward to bring it to the rule in our rules so we can actually maybe see it easier and understand it better, I guess. So I'm just going to kind of read through it, I think, and maybe during it explain a little and go on. In section 1211, there's 2 types of ways to bring a bill back that has died. It can be through reconsideration or a motion to rescind and bring it back. In the reconsideration of the vote, section H, I'm asking to amend, if a vote to reconsider has passed or failed on a particular motion under this section, that would be reconsideration, it shall not be in order to move the rescind or the vote on that motion. So if it's died in reconsideration, you can't use rescind. So that's kind of important. Section 1213, rescission of the vote. Any motion to rescind a vote under Masons, and previously we had to pull your Masons book out, and sometimes we'd all run up to the Rules Committee and try to decide if we're doing it right. But we'll keep going. Shall require an affirmative vote of 2/3 of the elected members to be adopted. I brought this earlier to the Rules Committee, and I had a majority vote there. I think 2/3 is a good, I think that's good. I was hoping it might pass easier through the committee if we did most, just a majority, but I'm going to go with 2/3. Our colleagues down the hall use 2/3. So I think that's a good way to go. A motion to rescind is not in order when the question can be reached through a motion to reconsider. So first, you have to see if you can use it through reconsider. A motion to rescind is in order on an action previously taken as long as no vested order or no vested right has arisen from the original action. So you can't take it already down to the, pass it on down to the other end of the Capitol. When an authorized act has been carried out, the power to rescind does not exist. And a motion to rescind may be made by any member. On a reconsider vote, it has to be on the prevailing side. So that's kind of important. It also is debatable and opens the entire question to debate. In a motion to reconsider, there is no debate, and there's no discussion, and there's no amendment process. So hopefully that might answer quite a few of the questions that'll come up. But I hope you pass this. Thanks.
Thank you, Representative Larson. Any other member for their first time? I see Representative Yin marching to the podium. Representative Yin for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this rule is different from what the good representative brought to us in Rules Committee before. It actually changes the threshold. So by default, you do have the power to rescind because it's in Masons, and our rules say if we don't cover it in our rules, we fall back to Masons. And in Masons, the threshold is a majority vote to rescind. This would actually change that by putting it in our rules that we do have the power to rescind. So that part doesn't change, but it does change the threshold. And while it would make it so we all know that the rescinding motion exists, it would just make the threshold higher. So you would actually it would be harder to rescind than it would be in our current rules now. And if that seems wrong to anyone, please correct me, but I believe that is correct. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Any member for their first time? This is members for their first time. Majority Floor Leader Summers.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. On and against this rule. You know, we've used this rule in Mason sparingly. I don't think we need to redefine it in our own rules in a different manner, in a higher threshold. You know, I actually probably have used this twice in my 9 years now. And very rarely is it used, but there are times and there are moments and there are bills that you go, could we have one more shot at that? One more crack at that bill? And we really rule this body by majority vote. And so I just think it kind of takes away from kind of the spirit of trying to do the best we can on every bill. And I think there's times that it's been used and people didn't like the results. And that could be, you know, that's just the way it is. It's a majority. Maybe the minority in that vote didn't like it, but it's not a bad rule. It doesn't need to exist in our own rules, and it certainly doesn't need it to exist at a higher threshold than our current Masons states. So on and against.
I see everybody's brushing off their rules books. That's good to see. Even the chief clerk has hers out. Chairman Greer, first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I'm going to rise in support of the amendment. And I think the motion to rescind has been used very sparingly. You know, and it's a It's a tool we don't much understand. It's a tool that gets confused with the motion to reconsider, but the motion to reconsider has its more stringent timelines, and then the member for the prevailing party has to get up. We're going to use this, if we can't work through that and we get to a point to rescind, it needs to be an issue or on something where something new came to light, or something that we as a general body say, well, wait a minute, we've got a mistake. We're going to strike it as if the last action never took place, and we'll start again with it. And so that's part of the reason I like, rather than going to default, which is in Masons, which means if it's not stated in our rules, that's correct. We can go to Masons and that's what we follow. And it's a majority, unless it says otherwise in our rules. It's just what we're doing. We're trying to put in our rules, makes this tool a little more obvious for when we maybe go down a path we didn't want to. And remember the gentleman who's going to speak against me here shortly, and I working on helmet safety, liability, right? We did some things. Well, I remember. Anyway, anyway, I think this is good to have this in our rules for people to realize that it's there. And I like the higher threshold. Should be for when we need to correct something. And that does happen from time to time. So I'm in favor.
Thank you very much. Chairman Zwanitzer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a question that I don't understand. Currently, with 2/3 of the body, we can do anything. We suspend the rules. So it seems like a lot of extra verbiage and process when right now if we had a real need to bring back a bill or any other vote or reconsideration, you can always do that with a 2/3 suspension of the rules. This would be a different process, but I guess I need more explanation on why we do it this way than just the way we always have.
Thank you very much. Any other member for their first time? Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess I'm just looking at the amendment and I'm trying to figure out what an authorized act is. As you read this, it says, when an authorized act is done, I'm not quite sure what that means and what's authorized or not authorized by this body. So if I could just get an explanation of that, might help me understand this a little better.
Thank you very much. Any other member for their first time? Chairman Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think I urge caution with this because we're trying to put something in the rule that's not a problem. And this is not a perfect process. I walk up those house stairs every day and I look at that third banister and I say this to myself every day, only God is perfect. And I think to institute a rule where 2/3 is needed, that's not the way our founders drew up the Constitution. You're going to suffer from this next year when we have this 2/3 introduction vote for bills in the budget session that was put in the 1970s. No, super majorities are not favored in Western civilizations. And 2/3 vote is real serious. That's to expel one of us. Say you can no longer serve. And it should be that high threshold for really serious matters. But we made a mistake on legislation. We're here to solve problems. It's what the majority floor leader said the other day. I agree 100%. And sometimes we make a mistake. And we got to use the rules to go back and fix and solve the problem. And majority rules. That's what our people elected us for, not to come down here and suffer the tyranny of the minority. So I urge caution in any of these super thresholds and urge your no vote. Thank you.
Representative Stiver for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the last speaker, you've said it before that 2/3 is unconstitutional. It's not in the Constitution. That's the way I took that. Article 5, I'm on in support of this.
Any other member for their first time? Any other member for their first time? First time? Any member for their second time? Second time before the sponsor, to the sponsor, Representative Larson. Dan.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Great discussion. I hope we can pass it. I think it's going to be a good amendment. To address a couple things, I think it was asked what a Oh, dang it. Authorized act would be. I think an authorized act would be when our speaker signs the bill to send it back over to the other side. I don't know what our other authorized act there is. I think in Masons, there might be, something else you might do. I don't know. But hopefully that takes care of that. About the 2/3 vote to bring it back. I think quite often if you couldn't have did it through reconsideration, which is a majority, and if you tried that and it did not pass or failed, you couldn't try a rescind, obviously. But if it's in that big of a deal, I think it's a big deal that this body brings it back. So I'm happy with the 2/3. Just a couple comments on the reconsideration. It cannot, in the rules, it cannot be made in the committee of the whole. I don't know why you'd do it there. Reconsideration cannot be done in the last 10 days. It must be made on the same day as the original vote. So when this was used prior, I think it was the next day that they brought it back. So at that point, they would use rescind motion. And I think that needs 2/3 vote. I think that's a big deal. In a reconsideration, motion cannot be debated or amended. And when disposed of, it cannot be renewed. So that's something about the reconsideration. In a rescind, you can debate it. You can amend or discuss it. So that's important. I think this is a good rule. I think just because when you're a new legislator, it probably took me 4 years. That's terrible. I was on the rules committee 2 of those years. I never did buy a Mason's book. Should have. So, not everybody has a Mason sitting there. And if you haven't been here very long, you don't know it's there. So I think having this in the rules is just a good idea. It takes what? Half a page? That's a big deal. Thanks.
Thank you. So members, we're voting on proposed House Rule Amendment 0006. All those in favor, please say aye. All those opposed, no. Division being called. All those in favor, please rise. Just to be clear, I should have ruled before we called for division. So I ruled it have failed. So now we'll do the division properly. Thank you. All those opposed? More than 22. The amendment has failed. So next amendments for our consideration, and just like I gave a member that had consecutive amendments the opportunity to order the amendments they'd like to take up first, I'm going to offer this member the same option. So Chairman Harshman, we have 7, 8, and 9 before us. What amendment would you like to take up?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If we could, amendment number 9.
So members, we are under consideration number 9. Please move the amendment and proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And members, I sent you an email, a little history, the legislature 5 minutes ago. And I think it's a fascinating piece to put in one of your files, whether or not, whatever we decide on this. But our Constitution obviously is set up in, bicameralism. It's only one state that doesn't. It's our neighbor, Nebraska, right? It has a unicameral legislature. And our Constitution says that the House will be at least twice the size of our colleagues down the hall, but not more than 3 times. And so we've had a different number of members in here. We've had as high as 64. We're currently at 60. So we're right at twice the size. And I think there's, we obviously know there's a genius behind all that. And it's not what happens at the beginning of the process, because the law is not made at the beginning. when it's in committee and when it's in committee of the whole. It's after it goes through both bodies. And it's had multiple votes, lots of ayes, and finally a conference committee if there's differences to iron them out. And then both bodies decide again. So it's with that end in mind that's important. And so I've seen this happen now in the last few years, and I'm a little perplexed, and I guess I just want to give our speaker and our leadership the tools and the backing and the affirmation that we believe in bicameralism. That house is more powerful. They represent twice the people, but we have more members. And so as you look at that history of those committee sizes, you can see we're twice the size. Many times we're more than twice. And now we've settled on this 9 to 5 thing for the last 20, 30 years. Appropriations has been moved around a little bit, but now there's this deal that we somehow got to be equal in size in a joint committee. These are joint committees to work together, right? You might have 2 members from one body absent, sick, couldn't make it. Should the committee stop if you don't have a quorum? Or, and so does it take a majority of both sides? All these things I think are really important. And I just want to give our speaker the tools that if something happens and 10 members get appointed to committee number 2, appropriations, well, we can appoint some more members. And I don't think it'll come to that, but I sure hope it doesn't. But I think I want to focus on the end and solving problems for our people, not on the wrong stuff. And I hope this will send a signal. I hope it'll back our good speaker. And that's why I bring it. I'd stand for any questions. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any member for their first time? Member for their first time? Representative Larson for your first time. Dan, Larson Dan.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I'm against this. I kind of think, why don't we, if we have an issue with that, let's bring it back. Let's vote on our rules and let's go with the 2/3 if we need it then. I think we'd all agree with that probably. But why are we putting it in there? I'm against it.
Thank you. Any other member for the first time? Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd ask for a no on this amendment. So a little more background on this. I approach this actually differently with the same premise, which is that this is about bicameralism. And right now the Senate is frustrated that they get outvoted in joint committees all the time.
Just a point of order that we don't refer to the other body. If you want
Okay.
to talk, I understand we're talking about bicameralism. There's only one other option. So maybe
Yeah.
just use that. Thank you.
Okay, so I can say the other body. The other body gets upset that they get outvoted in joint committee all the time. And it creates a certain frustration because the starting point for pieces of legislation is not where they want it to be. So then they amend everything they want in. And then it all goes to the conference committee, which can often be late at night at the end of the process. We're all waiting on the floor. There's been some angst about all this waiting in previous sessions. A lot of it is because the stuff is coming to the end. Remember one time we actually had to extend the session because of on the starting point, the House this body outvoted the other body. And I think this is bicameralism where we're going to say it has to pass both bodies equally to be a joint bill, to be a joint amendment. You're going to have to get some support from the other body. And if there's equal members, you're going to deadlock. And ultimately goes back to what we were talking about earlier. There's a reason why in our rules that it's not a joint rule, the membership on each committee. It's set by each house individually. This, my friends, is going to require a certain amount of selflessness, I think, for this to fail in this body, because ultimately our body has the huge advantage here due to our numbers, but the House is always bigger. That's true at the federal level. It's true in most states. That's not because the founders wanted us to outvote the other body in a committee. That's because they wanted the House to be bigger so that we have a more concentrated group that we're representing. It's a smaller amount, and we're elected at smaller intervals. And the theory was that we're closer to the people because of that. So that's why we're bigger. It's not about being able to outvote them in committee. It's not what they were thinking about, and it's not how it operates normally. So this is about bicameralism, to reject this and to allow the other body to just have that peace of mind, because this has really been troubling them, and it's caused us problems now for a lot of years. And ultimately, I don't think it's constructive. I think it's good to have back and forth, but most of the things that this has been, I don't think it's been constructive. It's good for us to have that. That's why it's good to have two bodies, but I don't think this part of the rule is constructive. So, I ask you to vote no on this rule, and let's resolve this. And I think we're going to have a better process, and there's going to be peace of mind over on the other body if we have equality of representation in the numbers in committee for both chambers. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Olson, then Chairman Nicholas, then Representative Western. Chairman Olson, first time.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and for the amendment. And, I was talking to my desk mate earlier today. I'm not even thinking about this rule, but looking at, for example, appointments in the confirmation process. And I just said to my desk mate, one thing I'd like about being a senator would be to do these confirmation hearings. I think that'd be pretty cool. And I give that to you as an example because the reality of bicameralism is all centered around one word: contention. That's the genius of the system. It is supposed to be contention. As much as I love my friends down the hall, they are a very different body, and they're designed to be very different, whether it's the membership or the duties or the term of office or whatever it may be. It's the entire system, from the federal government down to the states, with the exception of one state that I don't know, I think got it wrong, but are designed around contention. We're supposed to constantly be checking each other, whether that's between a branch of government or within the branch of government, which is what is the most unique about the legislative body, is the founders created that check and balance within the body itself. So it's hard to say that because we do it the Wyoming way, right? In Wyoming, we work hard with our colleagues down the hall. We work very hard to build relationships. When I ran to be your majority whip, I talked about relationships. I talked about those inside this chamber, the need to build them. And I talked about the need to build them down the hall. And all that's still true because that is how you navigate through the legislative process. But we cannot abandon all of that with the concept that we must always get along and that we must always move things forward, because that's not how the system's designed. We're designed to be in contention of each other. When our founders created this form of government, the one thing they didn't contemplate is political parties. They contemplated the contention to exist solely within the two legislative chambers. Wyoming modeled itself after that. They designed contention within branches of government. They didn't think that the check would exist within parties. So then ask yourself, is that the better system? That if you were to abandon true bicameralism, what would be your check? And I think that is really the secret sauce in this amendment. I'm not, or in opposing this amendment, and I'm not trying to put motives into individual voters, but if you abandon the true contention of the system, the only contention that remains is the party system. And I don't think that is a good contention system in America. The founders never envisioned that. They wanted it within the bodies and the various powers of the bodies, not within the hands of political parties. So I would urge you to adopt this amendment. Traditionally it makes good sense, but I think for those of you that are new to the body, the more time you spend working through the system, you're going to see there's really a genius in that system. So on and for the amendment.
Thank you, Chairman Nicholas, for your first time.
So first of all,
You can go ahead and
thank you, Mr.
acknowledge the
Speaker.
speaker.
Why is this amendment here? Well, it's public. information. If you go look at what the Senate actions were today, they modified their rules. And on those modification of their rules, they've made it so that they can appoint additional members to match House members when they choose to. So that's why we're here. So let's talk, how did this problem arise and is it a problem? Well, I would suggest to you what is a problem if you have to have a majority of both sides on every amendment, on every bill. Think about what the potential is for deadlock. So there's a reason why there are more House members than Senate members, because when there is a deadlock, there's a mechanism by which one side wins and one side loses. Otherwise, you'd be in a permanent deadlock. So, but as a practical matter, then what happens? And what has happened when I've been the chair of appropriations? I'll give you a good example, because we just talked about it, about the CapCon bill and how we were going to come back and add in a certain amount to the Department of Health cuts. We could have done that in the joint appropriations and done a cram down on them and put it in the bill. In the budget bill, but we didn't do it. Why didn't we do it? Because we want to be fair, and we want it. So I meet with the co-chair, and I say, okay, on some issues, we'll go with you, and on some issues, you go with us. And that way, we have kind of a gentleman's agreement or a gentlewoman's agreement on exactly what's in the budget bill or in other particular bills, because that's just a cooperative way of having working relationships and having friendships as we present all these budget bills and that type of things. And honestly, it's been the practice since I've been chairman of appropriations to do exactly that. But if we're at odds, I would respectfully suggest that that stagnate. If the Senate then takes this rule and implements it, we'll be deadlocked. And we may not get a budget bill that comes out because there's no way we're going to agree on everything. And if it turns into this tit for tat, you get 6, I get 10, and if you play that game, then I mean, it's kind of a fool's errand that they did it, because what does it gain us? It gains us a fight between them and us that it's not worth fighting. Because number one, I would suggest there's no need for it. Anytime that they come in and they kind of keep track of the cram downs, and so do we. And so we line them out, really. We kind of balance it out to try to be fair to both sides. And I just think it's the right way to do it. And that's what's happened in the past. And so now they're coming in and trying to change 100 years of history on this particular issue because for some reason, they just want to have equal balance on the Appropriations Committee. And I would suggest there's a reason, there's a different number, that we are responsible and we are responsive to our colleagues down the hall. And so on in favor of the amendment, because this is our rebuttal to them. I mean, I think we just need to do it. Otherwise, where does it leave us? And what's next? So on in favor of the amendment.
Thank you. So members, I want to remind us not to refer to the body by its name down the hall. We try to not do that. I know, and this is an odd place to try to do that, but when we're talking about this issue, but let's try not to. Representative Western and then Washit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think there's been some excellent reasons to support this that have been brought up, but there's one more I wanted to bring up, and that's tradition. Tradition is really important in this institution of the legislature and in our chamber. Right now, the tradition is to have 7 members on that committee, and I think it's a great one. I think the good chairman of the judiciary also brought up that there's plenty of opportunities for them to have their say in this process. There's 3 opportunities at their end of the hall to either add amendments to a bill and lots of other opportunities. And also down here, they're more than welcome to try to work with our members to amend a bill that they so choose. So I think there's still plenty of opportunities for them to have their voice heard and to try to work with us. So I think between tradition and some of the privileges that the other body enjoys, I think that this is a good adoption. I encourage its careful consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Washit, the Majority Floor Leader Summers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question for the bringer.
I understand what this amendment says, but I'm not sure if it was intended to solve a problem or simply to give more clout during ongoing debates in this matter, because I really don't think it solves anything for us to stand pat on this position. But just a little goal of what the ultimate motivation and what the outcome's likely to be.
Thank you, Representative Summers.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. On in support of the amendment, I want to give a concrete example. And really, you got to talk about both sides here just to have this conversation. But when we've always been 9-5, one body versus the other, and it was just an ordinary committee, you lined up on the side of the issues. It might have been the senators that were from little towns with the representatives that were from little towns, or it might have been whatever that issue was in education that you coalesced around, and it really wasn't about House and Senate. But once you equalize everything and it becomes very apparent that that's what it's about, then that's all it's going to be about. And I can give you a good example. So we do recal, right? And I make the motion because I want to go down this path. And we make the motion, we pass it, majority of both sides to pass a bill out. So we're down to the last day, whether we get any bill out, don't get any bill out, we have to strip things out, do this and that. And that's fine. But did it really serve the process? And I don't really think it did. And I think in the end, the more we constrain it to this us versus them, the harder and longer the fight's going to be. And so I think there's value in us maintaining our majority. And then I think it's important that chairmen work these issues out. If there's a real concern between two chairmen, that's where this issue, and that's ultimately why I did what I did. But did we come out with a better product because of it? Nah, I don't really think we did. On in support of the amendment.
Thank you, Representative Larson Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think there was a couple of pretty good questions asked. Does this really, does it solve a problem? It's pretty defensive, really. It's preventive, hopefully that you don't have to use it. Does it give us more clout? How do you get more clout than being a member of the Wyoming House of Representatives? You don't need any more clout than that. So I don't think it does anything to give us clout, but it's the Butter Battle book. How many have read Dr. Seuss's Butter Battle book? The Zooks and the Gooks. The Zooks like their bread with the butter side up, and the Gooks like it with the butter side down. And sometimes that's what it seems like when we're in the legislature, that we have kind of this, there's only so many fire hydrants for the dogs to circle around. And so well, frankly, you know that I'm accurate on this. And so we're just saying, listen, this is how history has been. And we're not going to give the position that the House of Representatives has had historically in this body. We're not going to do it. We're going to protect it. I have to tell you, it is the height of a legislative experience to serve on some of these conference committees for the budget bill or the CapCon bill. They come in and they glare at you with an eye, and my good representative colleague over here from the county with a 10, we brought pie one time because we're pure as the wind-driven snow on this side of the aisle. We brought pie from the pie place down here. They got up and walked out on us. Okay. We love them. They're good guys. We work together every day. One of those guys lived 24 miles away from me, and we would fly home on his plane on the weekend. A dear friend. But when it came to defending positions on budget and CapCon, They were firm. We are too. And at the end of the day, look at the great things we do for the state of Wyoming. Okay. I remember one time having the press out here say, we got to talk to you. What's going on? You guys just, there's this contention. I says, well, what meeting were you in? I'm here because I like this stuff. And I like those guys. I pity the guy on the other side of the Capitol there that has the same agency assignments as I do, because he has to work with me. And he has to tell me 4 or 5 times the things because I'm slow in getting it. But that's what we have. That's what this whole thing forces us to do, is to work with our colleagues on the other side and work with these agencies together and say, what's for the best of Wyoming and what can we get past? Now, we don't always agree, but we get it done. I think that this is really, do I wish that we had to have this in rule? No, don't, but it's a mistake if we don't. It really is. And I'd encourage you to vote for it. Hopefully never have to use it, but we like our butter side up. They like their butter side down. So our backroom guys, we've got a plan. That's our backroom guy right there. He's got a plan and it's better than their plan. Go read the butter battle book. It's great. So, but I'd encourage you to support this rule. I think we need it.
Thank you. Any other member for their first time? First time, butter up to the back, butter down to the front. Any other member for their first? What do we got there?
Okay.
Representative Kinner, would you mute your mic or address the body? One of the two. For your first time. Apparently he's decided to mute. Any other member for their first time? Member for their first time? Member for their second time? Representative Gray.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I would really urge a no vote on this amendment, and talking about some of the points that have been made over the last few minutes. First, from this point about contention. Contention is great. In fact, the person that brought that, I think, has told me before I'm a little too contentious, but I don't think I am. But I think contention is great. I think it's wonderful. The back and forth, I love it. The verbal jousting, I think it's interesting. It's vibrant. It's great, and especially when it's issue based. But an artificial, this is not contention. You want to talk about real contention, and not an artificial contention. It would be if both houses, both chambers have an equal number of members, and in order to pass something, they have to get one from the other side to come along. Because what happens is you're deadlocked. So you gotta work with the other side. You gotta work with at least one member. That's real contention. What's happening now is they're so frustrated because they're getting outvoted in these committees, and then they take out everything that happens there right away on second reading. It's the First Amendment. And it all goes to a conference committee, decided late at night. And frankly, it worked to the House's favor in 2017, 2018, 2019. Then in 2020, it didn't. And I think there was a change in 2020. Okay. And I think what we're gaining by continuing this practice, it's funny, the bringers of this, I think bills are going to be lost with this practice. And the magnanimity here that will be seen from rejecting this amendment will be appreciated by the other side. They'll see that we want to work on these things. And on the front end, one member is going to have to come along to get a majority, and that's going to be contentious. But there's going to be a deadlock. Without that, it doesn't come out of committee. So I think we're going to get better results with an equal amount on each committee. On Judiciary, I served on that committee last biennium. I think we were the only committee to do this because there's a vote initially on your rules. And so the committee does have the discretion actually to set this rule. I mean, you have a different number of members, but we set a rule that it has to pass a majority of both houses through that committee. that required, because initially the rule that starts it out says that each member has one vote. So the House has an advantage. That required, I think it was 3 of us had to go along with the Senate to agree to that. It was somewhat magnanimous, and we said, okay, we're gonna require both houses to pass every single piece of legislation through this committee, a majority. And we operated that way the whole biennium. And it worked. It really did. We had good conversations. They were vibrant, and enjoyed those discussions. You know, I don't think this mutually assured destruction thing where the Senate's going to appoint 7 tomorrow, and then with this rule, then the other chamber is going to pass 9, and then the other chamber is going to equal that to 9. Then we're going to do 11. Then they're going to do 11. Then they're going to do then we're going to do 13. Then they're going to do 13 until we get to 30, and then we're going to do 32, which I guess is the intention of this. And then they won't have anything they can do. I mean, come on, is that's the way this is going to work? It's not. It doesn't make sense. Let's just have have equal voting on each of these, in each of these committees. And that's bicameralism, because each body will vote separately on each of these issues. The amendments will have to have one member from one of the other chambers to come along and to pass the amendment in a pro or to get a piece of legislation out of a committee. I think things have really changed. I want to emphasize 2017, 2018, 2019, it worked to the House's advantage. I don't think it will anymore. I actually think it's going to backfire if this did pass. The ironic thing about this is I think it's going to backfire this rule. So I'd urge a no vote on the rule. Let's just resolve this, move forward, and move forward in a positive way. And I appreciate the discussion. I know this is an interesting point, and the 4 years I've been here, it's come up every single year. So I'd urge a no vote on the rule. Thank you.
Any other member for their second time before the sponsor? Second time before the sponsor, Chairman Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and members, thank you. I'll be brief. I think the real question from my colleague from the center of the state, he asked, what problem are you trying to solve? And I'll just tell you, so this is my 19th session. I've sat at that desk every time. I was on the budget conference committee as a freshman, went late. Several of those members from the other body became great friends of mine. Few of them, Lord rest their soul, are not with us anymore. And so there's a lot of history. It's more than just a few years of history. And that's what I want to preserve here. I mean, I think we've all been on the Zoom. We all agree this is better. You're in the fishbowl of democracy. It's where the people's house, where we look at each other and we can feel it. It's not about some people that are going to be, we're all going to be folks on the wall here soon. You walk out here and you see all these portraits. It's going to be sooner than we think, too. All of us, we were getting a little long in the tooth. We know how fast it goes. And so I want to preserve this great tradition, not because a few members who are going to be faces on the wall soon, just like the rest of us, feel that it's a problem. So I'm trying to prevent a real problem. I don't think we have a problem to solve. I'm trying to prevent a problem and preserve this beautiful legislative process. And it is bicameralism. And it is in Article 3, Section 3. And it's not about being equal. It's about the end product, because it's group genius. It's group genius here and down there. And then finally, when we get together, we think about it and then we come back and we have to concur and agree, yeah, it's group genius. It's the best product that the 90 of us collectively can send downstairs. So don't let our process slip away. I'm trying to preserve it. And I know, and I want to support our good speaker and support this House, support this institution of the legislature, and support for the future people that aren't even elected yet to continue this beautiful process. So thank you, and I appreciate the great debate. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Members, we're voting on House Rule Amendment number 9. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The House Rule 9 has been adopted. Division have been called. If you're in doubt, please rise. All those in favor, please rise. All those opposed? Less than 40. Thank you. The House Rule 9, proposed House Rule 9, Amendment 9 has been adopted. Mr. Chairman, we have 2 left with your name on them. Would you like to withdraw either one of them?
Maybe the next one, Mr. Speaker.
All right, please proceed. Which one would you like to proceed with?
Mr. Speaker, proposed rule number 8.
Proposed rule number 8. Please proceed.
Mr. Speaker, and I think this rule currently is a rule, and you can see in red if you pull it up on your computer.
Please move it, would you?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, my apologies. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to move proposed House Rule 8 to Rule 15.5, and really to amend the use of these things. And really, when this rule was passed, I don't know if you've seen the good speaker's phone. You have it? It's really valuable because there's not many of them left like that. It's like a Model T. And the idea of that rule was you can't have that up here talking within the bar when we're doing work. And so we used to have back here, kind of where the bathrooms are at, was the break room, and we had phone booths because you'd get a message and you'd go, well, I guess we had push buttons. We had rotary, and then we went to push buttons. And you'd go in a little phone booth and call your constituents. You'd have a little note to call them. And I guess I'll just say this to you. So this is what's going on, and particularly in third reading. And I'm watching it, and I'm just talking about the process, right? Because I'm getting a little long in the tooth there. But here's these things I think are incredible, and they're an incredible distraction to the moment. And I think when we get inside the bar, and it's just us, and it might be a real contentious issue, and you're settling in your seat, you know, the good representative from Albany County, unfortunately, he has to go first. Mr. Speaker's last, but somewhere in the middle, and we know kind of how that's settling out. You're settling in your seat, and you got to somehow say aye or no. And it should be just us, not somebody light flashing. Oh, I got one from somebody in the gallery or somebody back home. So I just want us, if you're going to do that, just like with the speaker's old, we can't do this. And so we have to step out of the bar to do that. And I'm just asking that maybe we consider all that stuff was to step off the bar when we're in third reading. We're doing these things because everybody here was watching us. And I think it's just and we have enough distraction with these things, right? I'm trying to read this amendment, but so that's why I bring it to you to talk about it and think about it. It's not going to end the process one way or the other, but I want us to think about it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Anybody else want to phone home? Anyone else for their first time on this amendment? Representative Duncan for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am on and adamantly against this rule. One of the things is that we are a citizens legislature. So what does that mean? That means that I am a broker, an owner of my own business. I have 5 employees back home. I have clients. I have other things. So yes, as that my clients and my other things that are going on in my other life, it's going on simultaneous while I'm here. So yes, I do have to pay attention while I'm here. But my device, which I'm not going to use as a prop, My device, I am going to sit here and maybe I receive a text message or an email. It is not necessarily from one of the people who specialize in a particular bill or a particular company or entity. Many times, some of the text messages or the emails that I receive are specific to a $500,000 transaction that's blowing up, or someone has an emergency and they need some expertise or something. Maybe it's a family member. I have 3 sons and a granddaughter spread across several states. So I have other things going on as well. I also will remind you that my legislative computer has only legislative emails on it. Only that email, because if something were to happen, may I remind you, if your computer were to be subpoenaed or need to be grabbed, I better not have anything personal on that computer that I don't want access to in any potential cases or anything like that. So my cell phone has all of my personal email as well as my business email. So I'm adamantly against it because I am a citizen of this legislature and I get it that there's sometimes some distractions. And I understand and I respect where the good former speaker is coming from. However, I live very busy life. I have 5 things going on at once. And my cell phone is a miniature computer, and that is what I have to conduct business on 24/7 typically. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And my apologies to the body that I did allow the use of a prop. And I thank the good vice chairman for pointing that out to me. I just didn't know what it was when it came out of his pocket. So I was a little taken back. All right, Representative Blackburn for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think when I read this, it says, during third reading, no cellular phone shall be used in any manner within the bar of the house. So if you go out there, you can use your cell phone to take care of your brokerage and whoever else. I mean, I got kids, grandkids, great grandkids. If they call me, I'm certainly going to probably take the call because they live somewhere else. I'll take it out there. It's not a big problem. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any other member for their first time? Chairman Greer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of the amendment, and I thought long and hard about this when it came before the Rules Committee before. And I think like the last speaker said, the fact that it's the third reading on that. Now, I don't want to get sideways with my vice chair because she's been packing all my water this year, trust me. But here's how I feel about this. So strongly, we normally get a lot of these purple slips would come in. And I'm crankier than some of you. And so I wait till we're done with third reading and go out and say, who would dare send me a note and interrupt me during third reading? That's my vote. That's my record. That's what I'm doing down here. Don't interrupt me. Don't send me a note when I'm on third reading. So I use my phone a lot. I mean, we're all busy. But I think that's what the bringer of the amendment says. Third reading. Just focus on what we're doing right there. So I like that. I like that concept. So I'm gonna be an aye vote.
Representative Stiff for your first time.
Mr. Speaker, on and against the amendment, I think we as representatives are entitled to use and need to use whatever sources of information that we have in the moment that we need them. I don't think that you are particularly weak-willed people who do as you're instructed by anyone, frankly. I think you all are very independently minded and you gather information from all the sources. I think certainly we try to do what we can to listen and pay attention to each other. But I think if we start adopting rules about what information sources we can have when, I think that's where does that stop? This is third reading, then it's second reading, then it's general file, then we're in a bubble. I just don't quite see how you, in a principle, if we adopt this rule, why wouldn't we adopt a whole other set of rules to shut down and put ourselves in a bubble? I don't think that's what we're here for. And I don't think that it's a problem that I think this is a solution, looking for a problem. So on and against.
Thank you very much. Any other member for their first time? Representative Clausen for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On against the amendment. So I was just sitting here thinking about the practical application of this, and I use my phone all the time to look at amendments and read them into what's going on my computer screen. And I got two other bills going on my second screen, and I don't see how you could ever enforce this and say, I mean, I use this for amendments during third reading, during second reading all the time. So on and against.
Thank you. Any other member for their first time? Go ahead and approach the mic if you'd like to go, Representative Martinez. Please proceed.
So I am on and against this amendment. So as a rookie in the game here, I just recently barely got a bill out 1 minute before the deadline. And part of how I did that, in an effort to be bicameral-ish or whatever, I had to bust out my cell phone. I busted out my laptop. There's no difference. Your cell phone is a system on a chip. Your computer is a system on a flat screen with a keyboard on it. And some members across the other side, or however I could refer to them, weren't responding to my extranet. So I pulled out my database and texted 6 of their members. 7. With 2 passes and 5 rejections, or not, they just didn't respond. So while trying to manage in the 2-hour period, which they had plenty of time to read a 6-page bill, they didn't respond, not to bust them out by name. But there's no bipartisan, bicameral, even within our own party, of the party of that of which I am. So I hit them up on their cell phone. And whether they were on third reading or whatever, if they're too busy reading the email of their children or reading a bill, whatever, I don't know the details because I don't have proof. But it made me frustrated. Then I had to walk around real quick, and within the rules that exist, talk to a few folks to try to get a couple signatures. I was fortunately able to do it, not only to find that one of our members here's extranet wasn't working, and it proved because it was like this, the circle that just doesn't work and it's gray. Fortunately, I printed it out and we got things through. I'm against it because of the fact that sometimes people need to look at their phone. I do think it's a best business practice, in support of the bringer. I do think that it's probably appropriate to step out in the lobby, but I'm still against it for the mere fact that people have been addicted to their cell phones. They don't look at their extranet. For me, it's because I didn't know how to use it. Once I did know how to use it, it surprised me, all the people that have been here for 1 million years don't respond. So in conversation to what we're all trying to do here, in my name that I will not use, but I'm from the land of Rome with the last row, and I'm almost in the last row. I just think that we might be able to need to use our cell phone. I don't think it's an issue of use of cell phone. It's probably an issue of how we use our cell phone. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I digress.
Thank you. Any other member for their first time? Any other member for their first time? Representative Burt for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On and against, I do respect the bringer. We've been mentioned a few times to keep it quiet in the chambers. So, I mean, I can respect the ability to, to take a phone call out in the side hallway. I mean, I think that's almost not only respect, but almost common sense. I have a number of constituents in my district that, they just don't use email. They don't have computers. They just don't trust them. Whatever the reasons are, they don't want to have to pay the extra money for the internet. Half the time, they don't even know how to text. I mean, it can probably take them 10 minutes to get one text out. And by the time, even if I was going to be swayed by that one individual, we're already past that one. Unless we're talking about cell phones, we'd still be here by the time we get a text message out. With the climate we're in and the reduced visitation from our constituents because of, the health concerns we have. I think we need to be able to keep our options open with being able to be contacted by constituents. There have been a number of times that I've been in a committee without my computer and without my email and stuff like that. That's just in committee. And I imagine there's probably a number of us out here that are receiving messages, whether it's email or, if we know our constituents as we should, a direct message on, through a message on our phone as well. Something to think about if we remove that and we have those constituents out there that do not get into the big electronic age, we could be removing their ability to contact us, with their concerns. So I'm on and against this.
Thank you. Does any other member want to speak to this amendment for their first time? For their first time? For their second time? Before the sponsor? Second time before the sponsor? Representative Duncan?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to elaborate a little bit for the bringer of the amendment. You can take my cell phone away, kind of like on the school bus, maybe walk around with a basket and collect them on third readings. But I need to remind the body that that won't solve it. Because if we are going electronic, and those of us that have our computers and things like that, we receive those magical little green dots that show that we have a message on our iPads and on our computers and everything. So those messages are still going to come. So whether this amendment passes or fails, it's not going to stop the transmission of those messages because they come on any of the electronic devices that we're using. On and against.
We're on second time on this amendment, on the amendment. Anybody else for their second time? Back to the sponsor, Chairman Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you. Members, really, it's not about being on the bus and taking your cell phone or taking any information. It's not about that. I think it's actually just more important about that because the part you can get here that you can't get on the Zoom is you can tell when you have the people listening to you in the body and you're making a difference or you can't. And about 90% of the communication is body language. Studies show, I think you hear about and you actually remember about 14% what is said. That's why I try to repeat myself 7 times. But I tell you, when it's third reading and we're inside the bar, nobody else is in here. Our staff can't come in here. Nobody's coming in here. No, it ought to be us. And we ought to focus on each other. That's body language. I don't have to hear anything. I can see it. I can see it from wherever. And I just think and I don't know. We're all dealing with this issue, right? And I'm just trying to preserve some of this in here. So when we cast our vote, when your name is called and it goes in the permanent record, we all did this together. Not doing that. We're all here. And I think we do that in our families too. I always tell myself, hey, be present. Because this day will go quickly too. So appreciate the great debate. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, members. We are voting on amendment number 8 to the House rules. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. No. The amendment has failed. Division being called. All those in favor, please rise. Thank you. All those opposed? More than 20. That motion has failed. Chairman Harshman, you have another amendment before us? Please
Mr. Chairman,
proceed. Please.
Mr. Speaker, this next amendment,
Are you going to move the amendment, Mr. Chairman? This is
I know you
go
want me
time.
to, I know you want me to withdraw it, Mr. Speaker, but all
I'm not going
trying-
to text you. I want you to make a motion or move on,
Let me check.
Mr. Chairman.
Speaker really wants me to take that amendment down, but
No. I just want the motion.
I
or
would
not?
move this rule, and it's number
7.
7. Thank you. And really, it was actually a good representative from Campbell County put this in our rules, Lord rest her soul. And when I was chairman of appropriations, I appointed her as vice chair, and she kept a tally of this, and it was really good. And I embrace that. I just thought that I did a little work with our staff. About 10% of those budget amendments that we do roll call votes that change it by 100,000 are roll call votes. I'm just trying to save about 10% of our time with this. That's it. And so you could pick the number. It goes up. If you did 200,000, it would save us about 25% of our time. We're going to have 70, 80 amendments or more, maybe 100. I got about 40. No, I'm teasing. But that's all I'm trying to do is not have those roll call votes for amendments less than 100,000. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a motion before us. You did move this, didn't you? Because I was trying to find a way to rule this out of order. All right. Any other member for their first time, member for their first time, member for their second time, to the sponsor, none. All those in favor of proposed rule number 7, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The chair is in doubt. All those in favor, please rise. All those opposed? So the motion is adopted, 31-26. And just to be clear, just a majority of the members present, not a majority of the body. So anyway. All right, any further amendments, Chief Clerk, have come through the door? That's the best news we've had today. All right, members, we are now voting on the permanent rules of the 66 Wyoming House of Representatives and the joint rules of the 66 House of Representatives and joint rules. All those in favor of the motion, please say as amended. All those in favor of the motion as amended, as the rules as amended, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Congratulations. You have just adopted the permanent rules of the 66 Wyoming House of Representatives. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, that clears the desk. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. And this is one of the few nights there is an event tonight. You know, it's in your session stuff. You can see it online. So I'm going to try to run till about 5:30. So, Mr. Speaker, I move that the House resolve itself into committee of the whole.
You've heard the Majority Floor Leader's motion. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The motion carries. Representative Provenza.
The committee of the whole will please come to order. Majority Floor Leader.
Madam Chairperson, thank you. I guess I'd like to just go through the committee of the whole list has been revised slightly. So we'll start out with House Bill 95, and then we're going to go to House Bill 54, and then we'll go to House Bill 111, and then House Bill 65, and then we'll see whether we have any more time after that.
The first bill for our consideration is House Bill 95. The reading clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 95, sponsored by Representative Zawanitzer. Game roadkill, an act relating to game and fish. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 6, Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources, to whom was referred House Bill 95, game roadkill, respectfully reports same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes, Representatives Banks, Haroldson, Hunt, Jennings, Knapp, Newsom, Sweeney, Winter. Noes, Representative Flintner. Representative Flintner, Chairman.
You have heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Madam Chairwoman Flitner?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I move that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with the recommendation that House Bill 9 pass. And I further move the adoption of the standing committee amendment. And with an explanation of both the amendment and the bill, I give you the good chairman of committee number 7.
Chairman Zwanitzer.
Thank you, Madam Committee Chairwoman. I'm pleased to bring House Bill 95, game roadkill, to the session this year. Those of us who've been around a while, this is what we would call an old friend. So let me give you a little bit of background. This bill first came in 2013, and it was brought by, I can't use a proper name, but as you'll see next week, we have a group from Cody of young people come down and bring several issues they choose each year and try to push. And so this was their issue in 2013. They asked me to sponsor it way back then. And I think this is the 5th time it's come, and it just runs out of time every year. And so this time we're doing a little earlier in the process, and I'm optimistic it's going to make it all the way through. And I brought it back this year because, quite frankly, when we brought this in 2013, our neighboring state to the north, Montana, liked the bill so much that their legislators called me and some other people, and they brought it, and it passed. And it was so good in Montana. Then Washington State brought it, and it passed. Then they took it in Ohio and Pennsylvania, and then California, and now they're looking at a similar bill in Arizona this year, all which started right here in Wyoming in 2013, and we just haven't done it yet. So it's a little bit of a point of pride for me. So what the bill does is allow Wyomingites to possess road-killed wildlife that they can find on our highways. And so it sets up a process for the Game and Fish Commission, you'll see there on page 1, in consultation with WYDOT, to establish this program. And basically it allows you to take a roadkill carcass under 3 provisions. So the first provision would be what we call a letter of prior authorization. So you are a individual or a company that lives in a high roadkill area, shall we say, and for hooves or hides or teeth or any number of reasons, you might want to say, hey, if there's roadkill on the highway and the Department of Transportation doesn't get to it, we want to be able to collect it for any number of reasons. An animal feed, selling teeth, who knows, but you can apply to the department and get a prior authorization permit to just collect these. Second ways are on page 2 would be a valid scientific or educational license, which is already in statute. So if you have a scientific or educational reason, the Boy Scouts have some of our University of Wyoming research programs have this, that if they see certain species, they can collect them at will without having to call Game and Fish. And then the third is what you'd normally think of. It would be a donation certificate. If you hit an animal or you see an animal hit or a carcass on the side of the road, you'll see there on page 2, you can contact the department and take the carcass and obtain a donation certificate. And then depending on the situation, right, because there's going to be a whole lot of situations, you contact the Game and Fish warden or the wherever the central office is, and they could arrange for you to bring in the animal. They could meet you on site. They could decide, you know, based on your story, time of day, whatever it is, what level of regulation, shall we say, of proof that it's a road-killed carcass you'd need. Then we just have some protectionary measures on page 3. This one apply to bighorn sheep or wolves or grizzly bears, mountain goats, anything under the Federal Migratory Bird Treaty Act, any threatened or endangered species. And then a separate provision there in C that this is only talking about motor vehicle collisions, right? So you can't say, oh, here's a carcass. Oh, I must have hit it. It looks like it was roadkill. You have to be able to prove it was a motor vehicle collision. Then we just allow an interstate game tag there on page 4. So talk about the standing committee amendment real fast, if I could speak on that at this time. We did have some concerns that were brought, that there was no provision in the statute that said you had to take the entire carcass, right? So we don't want people finding a carcass on the side of the road and taking the antlers or just the head, depending what it is. If you're going to take it, you got to take the whole carcass. And the second part was some concerns that there may be some really busy parts, interstate highways or frequently traveled parts of our state where if you see a carcass, we don't want people just pulling over the side of the road and saying, I can collect it and work on it there and create a hazard. So we are allowing the State Transportation Commission to designate roads in Wyoming where it would not be appropriate to collect carcasses off the roadway. And that I'd be happy to answer any questions on the standing committee amendment if there are any at this time. Or I would call for the question on the standing committee amendment.
Question having been called, all those in favor, say. You have heard the motion. Wait, excuse me, I'm sorry. On standing committee amendment number 1, say aye. Opposed? Standing committee amendment number 1 has been adopted. Now we're on to the bill. Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. On and against the bill. When you, if you look at it from a 30,000, I guess, foot view, if you will, it's easy to support the idea of not wasting animals, hit by vehicles. As my good representative from my county said right before I spoke, nothing like roadkill roast to make everybody's Sunday. But again, truly, we are, I think, generally conservative and would like to use animals. But so ideally, this seems like a great idea. But as we need to do, when you dig into the realities and the practicalities of it, it's a much more difficult, even dangerous proposition. And I do not think that it's responsible legislation nor fair to wardens who would be in charge of managing it. First and foremost, it's dangerous because of chronic wasting disease and the possible transmission of the disease that Wyoming has and continues to fight in a multitude of ways. We have a dedicated task force in Wyoming regarding this disease. The numbers and the areas affected continue to rise. Every year, there have been, the chronic wasting disease has been discovered in a new hunt area. However, at this point, it is not in every area yet. So there's many people working on this and they're trying their level best to keep it from happening. In addition to that, animals with chronic wasting disease are more likely to be hit on the highway due to the symptoms of the disease. And I know there was discussion about surrounding states passing this, but it's important to know and understand Wyoming's position as it relates to chronic wasting disease. We're sort of the epicenter of it, one of the two originating states. And again, it's just something that we definitely continue to battle. A canyon just west of us, northwest of it, was one of the epicenters. And we're finding it now further ranging in herds, wild game herds across the state. So a segue from that then is that we do have vetted programs that already exist regarding game meat donations. Without naming names, there's a great hunger initiative that you're probably aware of, as well as the agency in charge of game keeps a registry of names of people who are in need or want of donation from confiscated game. So both of these current programs have been vetted and they do the necessary testing for chronic wasting disease. So, and finally, it's a significant concern regarding implementation and enforcement of the program. Probably a lot of people in this room know, but wardens are perhaps some of the hardest working and put in the longest hours of any government employee, period. The demands put on them and all of the different things that they're running are great. And in applying simple common sense, of course, a vast majority of animals that are hit on the road occur at night. It cannot nor should it be a requirement, which it very well would become with this, a requirement for a warden to go to any collision called in any time of night. There is certainly a safety issue. I don't think the amendment necessarily hits all of it. So the example was used of interstates, but the reality is poorly lit roads where a lot of collisions might occur are also dangerous to have people pulled off on the side of the road harvesting these animals. So therefore, again, even though the idea might sound good, I don't think this bill hits all the necessary safety aspects. I think the implementation of the bill is not safe, unfairly burdensome on wardens, and it is just not. I don't think it's a good bill at this time. I would urge your no vote on and against the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Oakley. Representative Olson, Chairman Olson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So I just have some questions for the bringer of the bill. I guess I'm trying to figure out where I'm at, and maybe it's the lawyer part of my brain that always wants to think of the worst case scenarios. So I'm looking at the list, for example, of accepted game. And so my first question is really what goes into deciding which animals are on the list and not on the list? Because for example, gray wolves are accepted when they're classified as a trophy game animal, but what otherwise would be considered a trophy game animal, i.e. a big, beautiful buck, a big, beautiful bull elk, a moose, maybe even a wild bison. These are not accepted, but the gray wolf is when it is classified as a trophy game animal. So that's kind of that's the first thing I'm trying to figure out is maybe that's based on what's generally on the roadside. I don't know. And the second thing is I just want to try to understand, if we're not accepting those and those trophy animals, because then is it possible that we may inadvertently encourage some harvesting of trophy animals through the statute? And I know that might sound a little absurd, but I hunt here and there, but in my mind, when it's 30 degrees below and you have to scale a mountain at 4 a.m. to get out there just before the sun rises, deep in the snow, so you can make sure you're there in time when the herd comes over the ridge. I don't know. That might be, in my book, sometimes a little absurd too. So for someone who's highly obsessed with harvesting trophy game animals, is driving down the highway and doesn't want to miss the opportunity for the big, beautiful bull elk crossing the road, what really stops them from nipping that with their 1980 box truck? So, that's probably just my mind going off in places where maybe it's not so dangerous. But more importantly, I'm just trying to figure out why trophy game animals are not excluded from this list. And maybe that will help me. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Olson. Chairman Zwanitzer.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm not exactly sure how to answer that, besides if the cost of damage to your vehicle is worth it for you to see that beautiful elk that's just standing there in the middle of the road and you want to speed up to try to hit it and it doesn't move. More power to you, but that's when you would call the commission and the warden would say, yeah, if that elk didn't move and it let you ram it, it might have CWD or some other issue, and we're going to come inspect it, and we're not going to let you have it, and we will take it, to the dump, basically. That's currently YDOT's role, is to remove carcasses from the highway, to pick them up, and to basically dispose of them now. The argument comes in certain parts of the state. It's just difficult, right? That YDOT doesn't have, just an open bed truck to throw a carcass in and be doing this all day. And so I guarantee you now that if you have seen this bill all summer long, certain parts of the state, you'll think, oh, there's roadkill. And you'll think about this bill every time like I have. So to address the wolf issue specifically, when this bill first came in 2013, we were also right in the middle of a whole lot of controversy on wolves that year. And so the language has really stayed the same for the past 8 years in that regards, on wolves being trophy game in some parts of the state. We were a little worried people were going to find creative ways to try to kill a wolf and say it was hit by a car. And so that's always been kind of this provision of what's the dumbest thing someone could do and try to claim it's roadkill or it was hit by a motor vehicle, and when could the Game and Fish warden say, I don't think that's accurate, we're not gonna let you take this. And that's the protection. There is quite a bit of, and I've listened to those concerns. So in this bill, we allow rules and regs. The Game and Fish Commission could quite honestly make this very stringent and difficult for anyone who wants to possess a carcass, right? They could, through rule and regulation, the way I've structured this, to make it very, very difficult. My hope is they don't do that, or they know the legislature would come back and make it more flexible. But all those provisions are in there. I would just address some of the other concerns. So the major CWD states right now, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, 4 of those 5 states have roadkill provisions to be able to collect carcasses. Every one of those states that has CWD besides Wyoming. So I don't see that as much of a problem. I do think through rule and reg, they could address that. You got an email yesterday from the federation that's been around for, I think, 90 years that promotes wildlife. And they actually did the research. They talked to their members who want this. They called the 4 or 5 other states you'll see and said, have there been any problems now that you've had this law in effect? And their wildlife people in those states said, no, not really. There haven't been. It's been working. And so I'm very optimistic that it'll work here, that we're not opening the floodgates. But if there are people in our state, and I know there are because they've come and testified in previous years, that see roadkill every day that they drive to work, and they say, hey, I could use that for hooves, hides, teeth, feed for my animals. So I know the media sometimes can sensationalize roadkill, but statistics say it's less than 10% of the time the meat is actually edible. You have to clock it just right in the head, not the body. It's difficult to do. It's just not a usual thing to ever have salvageable meat most of the time from these animals. What we're really talking about is getting the carcasses off the highway and being able to use them in some cases for animal feed, but primarily taxidermists, Boy Scouts collecting antlers, you name it. That's what we're really talking about here. And I'll stay open for some more questions.
Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. A question for the bringer of the bill. So some time ago, when I was on the committee that dealt with the department that deals with our game and fish, at that time, the group that was really pushing this bill were the people that had hunting hounds, and they were looking to pick up the carcasses so that they would have a cheap source of feed to give to their dogs. And the director of that department, the department that deals with game and or fish, came in and was adamantly opposed to it for several reasons. And the first is that chronic wasting disease is spread by a prion. And the fear was that these dogs would eat the game that had chronic wasting disease, because primarily the deer that are wandering around on your highways, not really knowing where to go, they probably have chronic wasting disease. The fear was that the dogs would eat these animals, and then the owners would take them up to the areas where there's no chronic wasting disease, which I happen to live in an area where we still don't have it. And our local game warden is just afraid to death that we will get it. These people will take their hounds up there, run their hounds, the feces will be spread around, and all of a sudden we'll have chronic wasting disease spread to areas where it wasn't before. So that is my question, is what is the current opinion of the department that deals with our game and fish? And have they given you an opinion as to the result of this bill? Thank you.
Representative Wharf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Speaking in favor of the bill, I can tell you that I can't admit to this, but I can just say that I know in other states, this is a rather common practice. And one of the things that may be a little misunderstood, there's a lot of talk about CWD in the spread. Most of the time, the whole carcass is not removed. What the people that maybe I know are associated with at some point in my life, you only take the edible portion that's salvageable. So when you got an animal that's laying dead on the side of the road, you're not typically taking the whole thing. You're going to get out your knife and you're going to pull out the back strap. You're going to remove a quarter. You're going to remove what's salvageable. And in a lot of instances, there's nothing. I mean, there's some cases that there's just nothing there and you just get back and drive away. But in some instances, you can actually harvest quite a bit of very good salvageable meat. And I can tell you that, you know, I'm not worried about the safety issues. I think we're all smart. Cars break down all the time. They're on the sides of the road. You know, it's not like we're running people over right and left. I think it can be done in a safe and reasonable fashion. The concern about the spread of CWD, the prions are primarily located in the spine and in the brain. You know, that there again, that's not typically what people are taking home with them. They're taking the meat, they're not taking the bones. It was asked about trophy game animals versus big game, and I don't know if it's understood trophy animals, that's not referring to, you know, animals with great big antlers. Trophy game animals are wolves, mountain lions, and bears. And so those are species that, you know, the Game and Fish doesn't require you to take those home and eat them to begin with. So, you know, that's not something, I know some people that would actually stop and pull over and actually try and pull meat off of a bear or a lion. Not so sure about a wolf, but hopefully that answers some of the questions. But I think this bill just makes sense. Why not let people, I guarantee you the people stopping to use this meat value the meat. And the people I know that stopped and did it, they took it home and fed it to their families. They didn't take it home and feed it to the dogs. And I know it helped some families put meat on their table. So I would encourage you to support the bill. Thank you.
Representative Hunt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On and in strong support of the bill. I think that to address some of the concerns with chronic wasting disease, I mean, I think that at the end of the day, it's no different than hunting, is that you're never going to be certain unless it's, obviously the animal is severely impacted, that what you're shooting doesn't have chronic wasting disease, and then that's going to be transported somewhere. The same here. If you hit something with your car or you find something reasonably fresh in the ditch, do you know if it has chronic wasting disease or not? Not really. But I mean, the point being that we can't do this because chronic wasting disease, then we shouldn't be hunting because chronic wasting disease. And so I think that there's enough sideboards and precautions because we're not just allowing this willy-nilly, right? We are turning this over, if this passes, to the department to create rules and regs to make this a reasonable process. And there's language in here that requires a permit and so on and so forth. And so there are steps that must be taken to ensure that you're not doing something stupid, basically. And from a previous speaker brought up the issue of safety of folks pulled over to the side of the road trying to, throw a deer in the back of your truck. From a different perspective, with the situation with the state, economically and financially, down the road, is our state highway department going to have time every time to go collect these things off the side of the road, or that department which oversees the fish and wildlife? I don't know, but I mean, why wouldn't we allow private citizens who are interested in harvesting that meat to do that as well, so that that carcass potentially isn't laying there alongside of the road for several days, also creating a potential safety hazard? If in the near future there's, through reductions and so forth, our folks who care for our highways simply don't have time to get out there in a timely manner. And on that note as well, when it comes to the economics of it, times are tough. Times are tough for a lot of people in this state. And it's, all things considered, we don't know where that's going. So again, why would we not want to give these folks who have a potential opportunity here to take home some meat, if that's what they want to use it for? I say give it to them. So on and in support of the bill. Thank you.
Representative Haroldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm on TRW and we had this bill come before our committee. And I want to say, first of all, CWD, obviously, as a avid outdoorsman and sportsman, CWD is an issue, but most of the people who'd be picking up an animal in a roadkill situation is someone who's going to be processing this animal themselves. And they understand CWD well because they're an avid outdoorsman. I'll give one example. Over on a highway between Laramie and Wheatland, and we know the highway. I was on that highway and following a pickup truck who struck an elk, and I was the first on scene, and I helped them pick up all of their grill and headlights and everything and put them in the back of their truck and wait for the highway patrol to get there. But this animal who was struck in the head, this elk, was laying in the ditch. It was a cow elk. And this individual is like, man alive. He asked the highway patrolman, he goes, can we load that into the back of my truck? He goes, it'll make my insurance claim feel a lot better. And they said, no, that's not legal. And he says, why isn't it legal? And they said, because it isn't legal. You can't collect roadkill. And he says, that's a couple hundred pounds of meat that's going to rot in that ditch that I could go home, process up and take care of, and it'll feed my family and make me way less upset about the fact that I'm going to be paying a deductible. And so I think that there is a definite place for this. When we think of roadkill, we think of the semi on the interstate roadkill. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about there are some situations where this definitely will be a place that we could see a lack of waste and the civilian populace take care of an issue for the state. So I think it's a great idea, and I think that is something we should move forward with. Thank you very much.
Representative Romero Martinez.
I have 3 words: carne seca and jerky. So my heritage learned a lot from the people from the south of the place, more south than Texas, the other independent state, I almost said on accident. And growing up, I'd have to I would just say this: I'm in support of it. I think there's enough provisions in there. If it looks like it has some kind of disease or was hit wrong or done on purpose or whatever, I think there's enough safeguards in it. I think everybody likes beef jerky. And if you did just get your car busted up, it probably would make you feel a little bit better. And I think the main thing is when we start this session, we say some prayers to that he who that is the creator, and it was a living being at that time. And I think I also got confirmation from the tribe that starts with an A that they would use it because it's food. So I say waste is sin, is it not? I support it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Neiman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, another issue we don't think about. I live up in the northeast corner of Hawaii, where there's a big rock that's the shape of a stump. And the issue that we find up there is, and I would support this bill, I really do, and I stand in support of it. Another thing I've not heard mentioned right now is the fact that when you leave these roadkill, a lot of times along the edge of the road, I know of 2 specific instances where we've had bald eagles and vultures that have gone through people's windshields as they come by. And when that bird takes off, it's about 3.5 feet off the ground. And so if there's anything that we can do to help these guys and gals get this stuff away from the road, it increases our safety on our highways after somebody else has already paid the penalty of going to their auto body shop. And another issue is that we deal with this as ranchers and hay producers. A lot of times these things are just drugged down just barely off into the ditch. A lot of folks go through that country and they harvest that hay. And we run a lot of those animals and stuff through our machinery and stuff like that. And so just as another caveat to this, I stand in support of the bill. I'd love to see more of those animals gotten off the roads, especially in my part of the country. Thank you, Lady Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Nyman. I apologize for butchering your name earlier. Is there any other discussion? Representative Burkhart, and then I'll go to Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a couple things to think about. On page 2, Romanet 1, a letter of prior authorization from the department. Why would you go down and get a letter of prior authorization unless you plan to do this? I mean, really, it's not like a hunting license. Well, actually it is. With horns, antlers running hundreds of dollars an ounce to some people, you know, tearing up a 30-year-old vehicle that's already worn out would not stop a lot of people. So you have that financial incentive to do this first, to go out. This is like poaching with a truck, only it's kind of legal. The other one is, if you go over to C on page 3, it says, nothing in the section shall authorize the possession of any illegally taken wildlife or wildlife found dead due to causes other than motor vehicle collisions. I've seen carcasses along the highway that you can't tell how they died. There's not a mark on them. You're going to pick up something that's just laying there dead, take it home and eat it. Think about this. You know, I mean, come on. If you need meat, you need animals. I think food banks have plenty of them. The town in which I live has a problem with deer. The local police department has been hunting them in the cemetery at night. Let's just be blunt about it. That's what they're doing. The meat is checked for chronic wasting disease, processed, and donated. And I think this past season, they've donated to 72 families. Good use of the meat, but they know how it was taken. You know, I don't think I would go along the road picking up something. And that, as for the chronic wasting disease issue, I've changed my hunting practices over the years. And I think a lot of you know how extensive I hunt. And that I wear gloves with me. And frankly, I don't touch a dead animal without them. I have a very good friend who is a neurosurgeon. Yes, I have a friend and that is intelligent. And what he has told me is that there is no evidence that chronic wasting disease won't cross to humans and become the human variant, which is Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease, which rots your brain, is just a blunt way to put it. But there's no evidence it doesn't. And he told me if he knows of someone who has the disease, he will not operate on them. And most neurosurgeons have developed that practice. Even with double gloves, the prion will cross that barrier. So I have anything I get, any ungulates tested for chronic wasting disease. I will drive to the laboratory so that I don't have to process them before I have them checked. But the chance of contracting it, I don't think is worth it. And plus, it does come, as someone said, from the spinal cord, the fluids there, the fluids around the brain. You tell me that an animal's dead and you haven't broken any of those and get that fluid in the rest of it. I've seen animals spoil in a night, even when it was cool, because they weren't properly dressed, and you're going to have animals laying along the road. This bill just has too many problems with it, too many holes. I know we talk about this every session. It's become the perennial bill. But I don't think this is something we need to be encouraging in Wyoming. So on and against the bill.
Anybody else want to speak before we get chronic wasting disease? I'm going to go to Sherwood. Looks like we have some more folks. Representative Sherwood.
Madam Chairwoman, how's the sound?
Sound great.
Thank you. I rise to speak against this bill. As a game meat enthusiast, my family processes all of our own meat on our kitchen table, and someone who hates to waste food, my grave concerns about the spread of chronic wasting disease and the conflicts this bill has with existing statutes far outweigh its potential benefits. However, my biggest concerns with the bill is the limitation towards our workforce. Thanks to the talented work of a beloved Wyoming author, our wardens have risen to mythical status, and public expectations of them are skewed. We expect our game wardens to be in the field from sunup to sundown, checking hunters and anglers. We expect our wardens to spend time building and maintaining relationships with constituents, landowners, outdoorsmen, nonprofit organizations, and other agencies. I believe handling roadkill calls will take away from these essential duties. Our wardens cover districts up to 1,500 square miles. Thus, finding a warden that is close by the site of a wildlife vehicle collision will be challenging, resulting in slow response times. This will lead to a frustrated public and increased time in vehicle mileage. Just for reference, our Wyoming agency is a much smaller department than other states. There are 63 wardens responsible for covering the entire state. In comparison, our Albany County Sheriff's Department has 45 officers. So again, they are far and few between and have to travel many hours sometimes within their own jurisdiction. I believe our game wardens are already overtaxed and struggle to meet public demands, and during hunting season suffer from sleep deprivation. So as you decide how you will vote on this bill, I ask you to ponder, WWJPD, what would Joe Pickett do?
Representative Newsom.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I was just going to respond to one of the issues brought up by a previous person testifying was the pre-permitting of this. I live 20 miles from town. I hit at least a deer a year. And I would like to be able to have the permit in hand to be able to process that animal in a timely manner. And not have to wait, because usually I hit them right at dusk like we all do, or at dawn. And I would like to be able to process that animal in a timely manner, knowing I'm doing it legally with a permit. Thank you.
Chairman Swanitzer.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And the only deer I've hit was in the former speaker's district. So I always enjoy going up to that part of the state. And I think you've all heard it's the rural parts of the state. We're not talking interstate highways here. We're talking the rural parts of the state highways where this occurs. And I believe I'm totally in agreement with the speaker two ago. People don't know their game warden. You want to get to know your game warden, you call them, because the ultimate goal of this bill and the ultimate goal that what we should be seeking is to get the animal off the roadway as quick as possible. And the problem right now, it's not your game and fish that collects the carcasses. It's your Department of Transportation. right? And they have to somehow know where the animal is, pick it up and take it to a landfill in most cases. And that's why many of us know that sometimes in some parts of the state, these animals can languish for weeks because it's not happening. And if you want to stop CWD, the best way to do it is locate the carcasses, get them off the roadway and get them to where they need to be, whether that's processing if able or get them to, disposed of. If you're calling your game warden and saying, hey, there's a carcass on the side of the road, game warden knows where it is. They may decide to show up. They may say, hey, you don't get an option to take this. If you somehow have a sketchy story that, or you hit the deer and they can look at it and say, doesn't seem like there's any damage to your car of where you hit it, they'll know something's going on, right? We're going to stop, hopefully, cut down on poaching or people illegally taking wildlife. The other, I think, inverse part of the question previously mentioned of feeding this to your animals or whatever, is if you don't, it stays in the roadway for weeks in some places, and you have scavengers, eagles, coyotes, right? And if the animal does have CWD, they're spreading it through the ecosystem as well. So it's a trade-off. But ultimately, I think the policy for the state of Wyoming should be, we want these carcasses off the roadway. If there are people who want a letter of prior authorization, as you heard, or in some places of the state, it's your local taxidermist who wants these hides or the teeth or the antlers. There are places in our state where it's a daily occurrence to see a road-killed carcass on the side of the road. And there are places we've heard in testimony from other states in past years where people have these prior authorization certificates because they want either the meat or the hides, and they've contacted their game warden. The game warden knows who they are, and the game warden stops by once a week and says, hey, how many carcasses did you collect? 4, can I see them? Great, get to know your game warden. So I think it's a win-win bill. The Game and Fish has broad regulatory power if they want the rule and reg to make this really tough. You can read through the bill and they can make the regulations pretty darn tough. But the ultimate goal of the bill, you know where the carcass is, you called your warden, said there's a carcass, warden gets to decide to come inspect, have you bring it in, you're not allowed to take it. Game warden gets to call Whiteout and says, hey, there's a carcass, go pick it up. Whiteout begrudgingly might do so. So I would encourage your strong support of the bill. I don't see any other questions.
I believe the question has been called. All those in favor of Chairwoman Flitner's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it does so with the recommendation that House Bill 95 do pass. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Motion passes. House Bill 95 has passed the committee of the whole. Oh, okay. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 54. Reading clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 54, sponsored by Agriculture, Wyoming Meatpacking Initiative, an act relating to agriculture and economic development. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 5, Agriculture, State and Public Lands and Water Resources, to whom was referred House Bill 54, Wyoming Meatpacking Initiative, respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes, Representatives Blackburn, Clausen, Eklund, Ortner, Western, Wharf, Winter. Noes, Representatives Heiner and Larson Dan. Representative Eklund, Chairman.
You have heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Chairman Eklund?
Madam Chairman, I move that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with the recommendation that House Bill 54 do pass. And I further move the Standing Committee Amendment number 1. And if you look at your screen, you'll find that we have a substitute bill in consultation with the Business Council. We found that it just needed a lot of corrections, so it's probably easier to read this way. And I will turn over the explanation. We shouldn't vote on that amendment because it's kind of become the bill. I'll turn the explanation over to the Vice Chairman of Agriculture.
Madam Chairman.
Yeah, Representative Clausen.
Madam Chairman, I bring to you House Bill 54, and I'll dispose. So when you go to your going on your computer, go straight to the substitute bill. I'll move the amendment right to start with because it is a substitute bill, and it basically is less descriptive.
Could you move the amendment, please?
Did I? I'll do it again so it's right. I'll move the amendment, which is the substitute bill, and it'll be easier to follow along with the substitute bill. So this bill is for those of you who like your meat a little less roadkill, flat off the side of the road. But so I'll give you a brief genesis of where this came from. If you'll remember, in the middle of the COVID crisis, when everything was shut down last year, there was no meat in the grocery stores. And if you're an agriculture person, there was livestock backed up being euthanized back east. They were trying to get rid of pigs. I had people calling me, if you would take a semi-load, we would give them to you if you'll pay the freight. Massive problem, massive backlog, no meat in the stores. We took a look at this issue in Wyoming, and we realized that, well, it goes bigger than that. We took a look at this issue in Wyoming, and we realized how anemic our processing facilities or capacity actually was in the state of Wyoming. We had the capacity to state or federally inspect about 1,200 head of livestock a year, or beef a year. To give you some sort of measure of scale, to the state to the south of us, one day they do 6,000 head. So in a year we were doing 1,200. So that's how anemic our processing capacity in the state of Wyoming has been. Luckily, between that time and now, we are up to about 1,600, which is about a 40% improvement, but 40% of not much is still not a whole very big number if you put it into scale of the state to the south of us, or commercial production or processing. So going to this bill, we have a suite of bills that'll be coming at you that are aimed at this problem. This bill is actually its genesis was 108 from a couple years ago, if you remember that. But this goes in, and in looking into this issue, we realized that a lot of this was repetitive or business problem. I won't say business problem, but part of the solution was a business solution, reinventing the wheel every time, getting rid of offal. There was some business problems that every time you have a small plant throughout the state, they ran into the same things. So we wanted to centralize the information and have a kind of a working group, if you will, or someone, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time when you're trying to expand capacity in these small plants that we have in Wyoming. So that's what this bill does. And the substitute bill is actually a lighter version of the original bill. The original bill would have taken quite a little, or it would have had extra FTEs in it, and this lightens it up, so it's less prescriptive and more a priority that we want our business council to look at this. So going through the bill, page 2, it just says the council shall not meet fewer than 2 times a year with the Department of Agriculture to maintain a strategy of regionally located meat processing plants inspected by the United States or the Wyoming Department of Agriculture. And I won't go into the inspection tiers, but unless there's questions about it. Market Wyoming grown and produced agriculture, enhance the website. So Wyoming grown or produced agriculture, contingent on available funds. Go through, and these are current business council programs. Doesn't add any business council programs, but just gives them a little bit of a priority to use their current programs for meat processing plants in the state. Provide to create, maintain, and maintain infrastructure. Let's see. On the bottom of page 3, this was an amendment to our original bill, but it goes towards it actually increases the number, but not to exceed $6 million per project, and that's current for any project in the business council. One of their priorities is coordinate strategies to improve the meat processing facilities. So we have a lot of different strategies, and this goes back to reinventing the wheel if we have somebody meeting to keep track of this information. The rest of it's fairly housekeeping. If you move on to page 4, any meat processing facility receiving assistance under this section shall comply with all regulations, and the council will give a report to the Joint Ag Committee. And that's the bill, and I'll stand for any questions.
Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I do have a question, and I totally support the bill, so this is not meant to undermine the bill at all. And I understand the issue of the meat processing that we experienced over the last year. But my question is, and I use a lot of wool type things in the rest of my life, and I'm wondering whether it would, because this bill is directed toward the Business Council, would it be considered acceptable in a future amendment to maybe work in wool and maybe even leather goods into this, because we're looking at the marketing type issues? And I know as we just look at supply chain issues over the last year, I mean, I myself have made a greater effort to purchase American wool products for my use, and rather than some comes out of other countries and that kind of thing. Whether we would be able to find marketing opportunities, not just for the meat, but also for the wood or wool, excuse me, and leather, whether that could be inserted into this bill without harming it, or a different one. As I say, I don't want to be a detriment to the meat component, because I understand that issue. But if there's an opportunity, we had like the beef chain a couple years ago, the ability to market Wyoming wool or even leather products, I think there's a lot of potential for that. And if it would work in, I would like to consider that.
Representative Clausen.
Madam Chairman, the good representative from Cheyenne, I don't know if this may be the vessel for that, as we do have some marketing programs for wool, but I may work offline with you and see if we can find a spot for it, but this was geared more towards the processing facilities themselves. This bill is the marketing of the end product. The problem with the meat product is we have huge demand in the state of Wyoming for our product, but we have no way to get it out, with no way to process as far as the meat side goes. So you can have all of the greatest livestock in the world, but if you can't sell it, to your customers, if you have no way to process it, if it's standing on what we saw during this pandemic, you have literally livestock standing 10 miles or 1 mile from a urban area, and you have no way to get that to those people that basically empty grocery store shelves. And this is geared more in that direction, but I think we may be able to find a spot for it. I'll work. This is geared more on the processing side versus the actual commodity side.
Hearing the question having been called, all those in favor of the Standing Committee Amendment number 1, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? That amendment, Standing Committee 1 passes, is adopted. And now we'll move on to the bill.
Question.
Oh. Question having been called on, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? That House Bill 54 has passed the Committee of the Whole. Guess we're. Okay. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 111. The reading clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 111, sponsored by Representative Washit. Access to anatomical gifts and organ transplants, an act relating to healthcare. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, to whom was referred House Bill 111, access to anatomical gifts and organ transplants. Respectful report, same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Representatives Clifford, Connolly, Flitner, Hallinan, Ottman, Romero Martinez, Stivar, Wharf, Wilson. Representative Wilson, Chairman.
You have heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Madam Chairman Wilson?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with the recommendation that House Bill 111 do pass, and I will turn the explanation of the bill over to the representative from House District 36.
Representative Washit.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I bring you House Bill 111, and this is a bill that is preventive in nature. It is focused on a type of discrimination which seems amazing that it occurs, but it does occur. We heard testimony in committee about this. What this bill addresses is the availability of anatomical gifts or organ transplants for folks with developmental disabilities and other disabilities. And what happens in some cases is that an individual who has one of these disabilities, but who also has a need for an organ transplant, either is denied the opportunity for the transplant or is placed lower on the list to receive that organ solely because of the disability. And what this bill says is that if you are otherwise otherwise medically eligible for that organ transplant, the fact that you have an unrelated disability should not bar you from receiving that organ. Yet we heard testimony that across the country, this type of discrimination occurs. And we heard that some of the other 16 states that have this bill or similar legislation in place pass their bills only after someone tragically was discriminated against. And the problem, the huge problem, is that when you need an organ transplant, time is of the essence. And so while this type of discrimination is already illegal under federal law, under the Americans with Disabilities Act, resolving those issues in federal court pursuant to the Americans with Disabilities Act in a timely manner is virtually impossible. And so the solution that has been cultivated around the country is for states to incorporate the Americans with Disabilities language about discrimination in these types of cases, and then to create an expedited relief mechanism within state law. And that's what House Bill 111 does. It doesn't create any new case law or any new statutory law that doesn't exist somewhere else. It already exists in federal law and then is incorporated here in this statute. And it then calls upon our district courts that when there is a claim of discrimination or possible discrimination under this act, that the district courts would give that an expedited review. I ask you to think about if you were in a situation and you had a loved one, a family member, a relative who needed an organ transplant, but also happened to have a disability, and somewhere in the complicated process of approving organ transplants, whether it's the healthcare professional, the transplant center, the insurance companies, somewhere along that line, you are denied an opportunity to get a transplant for your person you care about. And then when you try to get resolution, it just takes forever, like running in bubble gum. And all the time, the person who needs the transplant continues to deteriorate. The need doesn't go away. So that's what the bill does. That's the Reader's Digest version. I'm more than happy to provide the War and Peace version. But sensing the eagerness of the body, I will take questions and will happily go through specific portions of the bill if you so desire.
Is there any discussion on Amendment 1? Representative Hallinan.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Amendment 1, I'll kind of go through that initially. It looks kind of complicated, but it's rather simple, actually. Items on the amendment on line 5, 8, 16, and 19 delete items of other areas of disability, and lines, all the other lines other than line 25, all of the other lines simply include the qualification that these be developmental. Developmental was put in front of the word disability. Item 25 is a definition of developmental disability. It means a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities of an individual, originates before the individual attains 18 years of age, and continues or can be expected to continue indefinitely. The term shall include genetic defects, cerebral palsy, epilepsy, and autism. Now I'll give you the reason for this amendment. I think this bill has a noble purpose, but it is too broad. I will attempt to limit it to the proper intended purpose of the legislation. Basic to the error of the bill is in section 35-5-301A IV, which states that disability has the meaning stated in the American with Disabilities Act of 1990. The act applies the disabled label to those with Alzheimer's disease, ordinary dementia, and those imprisoned with disabilities described in the ADA. The bill outlaws the placement of a qualified recipient on a lower priority position than the position at which the individual would have been placed if the individual would have been placed and he did not have a disability. I believe this would be an unjust and even possibly an immoral action. It would be unjust to fathers and mothers of children, veterans, and other innumerable candidates for a transplant, including those with a developmental disability. The amendment deletes the disabled description included in 35-5-101A IV, and it replaces it by adding developmental disability before disabled everywhere in the bill, and adds the definition of developmentally disabled in place of 35-5-101A IV. Now, a little comment about the origin of the bill. It was initially named for a developmentally disabled boy. His parents are from Wyoming. They have led a campaign to introduce the idea for this bill throughout the country. We have heard from the mother in our committee meeting on her support for this bill. There we learned from the supporters of their fear for their developmentally disabled child in the event of a need for a transplant, but being discriminated against due to their developmental disability. That was the concern of those who spoke at the meeting. And that is the essence of this amendment. I believe that this amendment will redirect the bill from coverage of those not needing coverage to those who do need it. And for that, Mr. Chairman, I urge your support for this amendment.
Representative
you.
Hallinan, I'm gonna just ask you real quick to move the bill. Or the amendment, I'm sorry, if you could move the move amendment number 1 for us, please.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, Madam Chairman, I move amendment number 1 to House Bill 111. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Hallinan. Chairwoman Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm on and opposed to the amendment. And we had this discussion in committee, and we decided not to insert it at that time. And my reasons for that are that the purpose, if you look in the bill on the bottom of page 11, it says that a covered entity may take the disability into account following an individualized evaluation of the individual. So what we want to do is get away from identifying specific diagnoses or conditions and putting the patient into a box based on that, but the provider can evaluate the person's specific condition. So clearly, if a patient had Alzheimer's and a 6-month lifespan expectation anyway, that would be an individual assessment. But I think this amendment really makes it too narrow, because with the focus on a developmental disability, which obviously we don't want people with those situations to be discriminated against, we've ruled out the possibility, say, of a person with schizophrenia or with a bipolar disorder. I mean, there would be, why should we not have those people considered? I mean, I just think that in the attempt to say, well, let's pick just the cute little 4-year-old and put them in, we're really defeating the broader purpose of the bill, which is that people should not be discriminated on just because, and if you go through here, the word solely on the basis of a disability. So I'm against the amendment.
Any further discussion on Amendment 1? Sorry, Representative Washington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On and against the amendment. The bill was carefully crafted with the assistance of an attorney who's done a lot of work with a particular type of developmental disability. And I communicated with him because I strongly believe that the good representative doctor from the north in Wyoming truly has the best interest at heart. And I don't dispute his motives at all in this regard. But in conversations with this attorney, it was argued and pointedly pointed out that the language in this bill was carefully selected based upon the Americans with Disabilities Act and case law in cases where the Americans with Disabilities Act had been litigated. And my worry is that the more we alter the language from what is already contained in decades of case law pertaining to the Americans with Disabilities Act, we invite additional litigation on these questions. And so it would be my preference that we resist this amendment and pass the bill with the language as written so that we can avoid unnecessary litigation over changed language that really doesn't need to be changed. Secondly, echoing the good chairman of Labor Health, that individualized assessment will take care of most of those concerns that the good doctor has raised. What we're looking at here is discrimination based, well, because your child has the XYZ condition, your child gets lower on the list or doesn't get the transplant. That's not individualized. That's kind of a broad brushed approach to deciding a quality of life issue. And so the bill already contains this language for an individualized assessment. And if after that individualized assessment, there is a medical reason not to grant the transplant, that's good. That's a proper outcome and provided for already within the bill. Thank you.
Representative Romero Martinez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On and against the amendment, I stood through the testimony in the Labor Health and Committee, And when you go to Google and you look up the 10 most common disabilities, heart, lung, mental, diabetes, cancer, neurological systems, not all of the, well, some of them can be developmental, but some of them are physical. I agree with the bringer of the bill. I want to give a brief example, two of them actually. Both of them relating to my family, actually. One member of my family was given a wrong diagnosis and an organ was taken out that was the wrong organ. This person, who's near and dear to my heart, ended up struggling the rest of his life because of an improper, whatever happened there. Another member of my family was given a diagnosis of another disability. And then later, 20 years later, re-diagnosed because they did have another individual assessment they thought he had. And anyways, long story short, I think this bill is complete. I don't criticize negatively the bringer of the amendment. I just think that we want to be more broad because there's different types of disabilities that are covered by the ADA. On and against, thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Hallinan.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, I really respect the author of this bill, the sponsor. I think he's done a fine job in representing the folks that we had at our committee. I still think that it has unintended consequences. On page 8, it says, any licensed provider of healthcare services, including licensed healthcare practitioners, of which I am one. Then on page 12, it says, a covered entity, of which that includes the physicians, shall take steps necessary to ensure that an individual with a disability, and you realize that is the broader group, is not denied medical services or other services related to organ transplantation. So I think that the physicians are ordered by this part of the bill that they have to do these tests on people that, for instance, that they have Alzheimer's dementia. They have to do tests to see if they are going to get a transplant, if they have a transplantable condition. And then it says that an action can be brought in the district court for the county where the affected individual resides or resided or was denied the organ transplant or the referral from the physician. The affected individual may commence a civil action for injunction and other equitable relief against the covered entity, which is a physician. So I don't believe that this bill was entitled or was planned to do any of these actions. And I think the real reason this bill was put forward was for those developmentally disabled kids that the parents are concerned about. And for that reason, I ask that you support this amendment. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Question having been called, all those in favor, say aye. Or on Committee of the Whole Amendment 1, all those in favor, please say aye. Opposed? That the Standing Committee Amendment number 1 has failed. We are now on Committee of the Whole Amendment 2. Minority Leader Connolly.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I move Committee of the Whole Amendment number 2 to House Bill 111, and I ask for your favorable consideration. Friends, we had a great overview of a great bill, honestly. And just to remind you, what this bill does is for the first 13 pages, it moves into our statute what the Americans with Disabilities Act says about access to anatomical gifts and organ transplants. Starting on the bottom of page 13, that's the Wyoming section. It's called enforcement, and it is how individuals who have not been put on the list properly have expedited access to our courts. So this is the Wyoming section. What the amendment before you does is just a simple fix. The very last two substantive lines, which are on page 15, lines 5 and 6, attempt to limit that access just a bit. And I think individuals should have full access to the courts. So with that, I would ask for your favorable consideration.
Is there any discussion on Amendment 2? Representative Washit.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This amendment, I believe, presents a policy decision for the body. Whether or not you want people who might be aggrieved by violations of this to have the ability to seek monetary damages, or whether you just want them to have injunctive relief to obtain the care. The bill is written to not include financial monetary damages. I'm pretty much good either way. So it's a policy call for the body.
Minority Floor Leader Connolly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And the good bringer of the bill is absolutely right, but know that it doesn't guarantee any kind of monetary damages. It's honestly just about access to the courts, whether or not an individual can bring it. So again, you'll see on the previous page, it's about access to the courts and with injunctive or equitable relief. This just doesn't have a prohibition on it in terms of additional access to the court. And so with that, I would ask for your favorable consideration.
Question having been called, all those in favor of Standing Committee Amendment number 2, say aye.
Point of order, it is the Committee of the Whole Amendment number 2.
Question having been called, all those in favor of the Committee of the Whole Amendment number 2, say aye. All those opposed? That amendment has failed. And we are now back on the bill, House Bill 111. Question having been called. All those in favor of Chairman Wilson's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it does so with the recommendation that House Bill 111 do pass. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed? That motion, House 111 has passed Committee of the Whole. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Madam Chairwoman, I move the Committee of the Whole rise and report.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Oh, great.
Reading clerk will read the Committee of the Whole report.
Mr. Speaker, your Committee of the Whole, having under consideration bills on general file, begs leave to report as follows. House Bill 95, do pass amended. House Bill 54, do pass amended. House Bill 111, do pass. Representative Provenza, Chairman.
No, now you can move your motion. Move it.
I move the adoption of the committee of the whole report.
You've heard the motion to adopt the committee of the whole report. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries. Congratulations, Representative Provenza. Thank you, members. Congratulations, Representative Provenza. Let's see, we have a couple of orders of business. Standing committee reports, please. Reading clerk.
Mr. Speaker, your committee number 1 judiciary, to whom was referred House Bill 46, crime of bestiality, respectfully reports same back to the House with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Representatives Crago, Larson Dan, Oakley, Olson, Provenza, Rodriguez Williams, Washit, Yen, Zawanitzer. Representative Olson, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 1 judiciary, to whom was referred House Bill 73, birth certificates, gestational agreements, respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes, Representatives Crago, Oakley, Olson, Provenza, Yin, Zwanitzer. Noes, Representatives Larson Dan, Rodriguez Williams, Washit. Representative Washit, Vice Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 2 appropriations, to whom was referred House Bill 26, fuel tax, respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Representatives Kinner, Larson Lloyd, Nicholas, Schwartz, Simpson, Stith, Walters. Representative Nicholas, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 2 appropriations, to whom was referred House Bill 148, fees paid to Secretary of State amendments, respectfully report same back to the House with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Representatives Kinner, Larson Lloyd, Nicholas, Schwartz, Simpson, Stith, Walters. Representative Nicholas, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 4 education, to whom is referred House Bill 174, local government sales and use taxes. Respectful report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes, Representatives Brown, Connolly, Harshman, Obermuller, Paxton, Summers. Noes, Representatives Andrew, Nyman, Newsome. Representative Paxton, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 9, Minerals, Business and Economic Development, to whom was referred House Bill 67, Geothermal Energy Review. Respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes, Representatives Bear, Burkhart, Duncan, Air, Gray, Greer, Heiner, Sherwood, Western. Representative Greer, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 9, Minerals, Business and Economic Development, to whom is referred House Bill 102, Wyoming Preference Act of 1971 amendments. Respectful report, same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Representatives Bear, Burkhart, Duncan, Air, Sherwood, Western. Noes, Representatives Gray, Heiner. Excused, Representative Greer. Representative Duncan, Chairman.
Thank you, reading clerk. We have a few re-referrals. Chairman Eklund.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to re-refer House Bill 51 to Committee number 2 Appropriations.
House Bill 51 is re-referred to Committee Number 2 Appropriations. Vice Chairman Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to re-refer House Bill number 67 to Committee Number 2 Appropriations.
House Bill 67 is re-referred to Committee Number 2 Appropriations. Chairman Paxton, did you have one to re-refer? Maybe Chairman Paxton, come up to the Chief Clerk and we'll sort that out. Please. Messages from the Senate.
Message number 160. Third reading failed. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below failed to pass the Senate. Third reading by the vote indicated. Senate File 5, driving under the influence amendments. Ayes 14, noes 16. Sincerely, Ellen Thompson, Senate Chief Clerk. Message 161. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below passed the Senate on third reading in an amended form by the vote indicated. Senate File 9, State Employee Moving Expenses. Ayes 18, noes 12. Sincerely, Ellen Thompson, Senate Chief Clerk. Message 162. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below passed the Senate on third reading by the vote indicated. Senate File 13, Abandoned Vehicles, Towing Services, Liens, and Titles. Ayes 30. Sincerely, Ellen Thompson, Senate Chief Clerk. Message 163. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below passed the Senate on third reading in an amended form by the vote indicated. Senate File 15, Temporary Licensing and Permitting Authority 2. Ayes 30. Sincerely, Ellen Thompson, Senate Chief Clerk. Message 164. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below passed the Senate on third reading in an amended form by the vote indicated. Senate File 19, Public Health Emergencies, Immunity Amendments. Ayes 23, noes 7. Sincerely, Ellen Thompson, Senate Chief Clerk. Message 165. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below passed the Senate on third reading in an amended form by the vote indicated. Senate File 33, Physician Assistance Amendments. Ayes 29, conflict 1. Sincerely, Ellen Thompson, Senate Chief Clerk. Message 166. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below passed the Senate on third reading in an amended form by the vote indicated. Senate File 44, Solid Waste Cease and Transfer Program Funding. Ayes 30. Sincerely, Ellen Thompson, Senate Chief Clerk. Message 167. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below passed the Senate on third reading by the vote indicated. Senate File 52, Insurance, Mental Health, and Substance Use Parity. Ayes 30. Sincerely, Ellen Thompson, Senate Chief Clerk. Message 168. Mr. Speaker, the bills listed below passed the Senate on the third reading in an amended form by the vote indicated. Senate File 88, Ownership of Fossils and Artifacts. Ayes 30. Sincerely, Ellen Thompson, Senate Chief Clerk. Message 169. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below passed the Senate on third reading in an amended form by the vote indicated. Senate File 82, Local Impact Assistant Payments. Ayes 27, noes 3. Sincerely, Ellen Thompson, Senate Chief Clerk. Message number 12. Mr. Speaker, this is to inform you that the Senate has adopted the temporary Senate and joint rules of the 66th Wyoming State Legislature as the permanent Senate and joint rules of the 66th Legislature General Session with the following amendments. SR 1 adopted. SR 2 adopted. SR 3 adopted. SR 4.1 adopted. SR 4.2 adopted. Joint Rules 17-1B and Appendix A to Joint Rules are amended. Joint Interim Committee Rules. Sincerely, Ellen Thompson, Senate Chief Clerk.
Mr. Majority Floor Leader, that clears the desk.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House adjourn until 10 a.m. tomorrow, the 4th day of March, 2021.
Committee announcements. Committee announcements. Chairman Eklund.
Mr. Speaker, there will be no Ag Committee meeting in the morning. Our desk is clear right now.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your committee number 3 revenue will meet tomorrow, Thursday, March 4th, 8 a.m. Capitol Extension Room number 3, and of course online, Mr. Speaker. And we're going to continue discussion on House Bill 94, solar electricity generation taxation, and House Bill 108, wind energy production tax. And as time allows, House Bill 180, property tax deferrals, and House Bill 176, digital streaming tax. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Chairman Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your committee number 8, Transportation, Highways, and Military Affairs will meet tomorrow upon noon recess to consider House Bill 144 and House Bill 187.
Thank you. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, you have further business?
Mr. Speaker, thank you. So I'm going to give you guys the committee of the whole list. And I think as we debate bills going forward and amendments, think about the time that we're going to spend and how many bills are going to die in the process of that debate. So just a gentle reminder, we're here to debate bills and amendments and rules, but it all has consequences to the bills coming before the body. So with that, I'm going to give you guys the committee of the whole list. 65, 103, 118, 87, 17, House Joint 3, House Bill 135, House Bill 46, 148, 10, 76, 85, and 101.
Thank you for that optimistic committee of the whole order, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. Any other announcements for the body? Any other announcements? You've heard the Majority Floor Leader's motion to adjourn until 10 a.m. Thursday, March 4th, which will be our 13th day of the 66th Wyoming Legislature. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. We are adjourned until 10 a.m. March 4th. Have a good evening and thank you. Just as a general reminder, we do have a reception tonight, one of very few, so please consider attending those receptions as they become available. Thank you. Good work today, members.